Okay. All right. Yeah, if you could set it up.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Is it the same? Is it the same words?
It should be cut.
Well, hopefully it's the same words. All right, let's begin.
Don't worry.
Yeah. Of starvation, arise, ye wretched of the earth, for justice thunders condemnation, for a better world's in birth. No more traditions change shall bind us, as we slaves no more enthralled. The earth shall rise on new foundations, we have been not, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict, let it stand in its place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. It's the final conflict, let it stand in its place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. We want no condescending saviors to rule us from their judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors, let us consult for all. To make the thief disgorge his booty, to free the spirit from itself, we must decide our own duty, we must decide and do it well. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in its place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in its place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. All right. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. This is the first conference that the Revolution Report Media Collective has held. We're, just for those of you who don't know us, we're, well, my name is Donald Porter. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Revolution Report. I'm an international journalist. My full-time job is at Russia Today, so I live in Moscow, actually. And that's actually part of why we're calling this an international media conference. We're not only going to have journalists and speakers from the United States, but also from, well, I'm already in Moscow. We have another guy from the UK who's going to be calling in video call to speak. We've got Jeff Monson. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's a Russian deputy now. I collaborated with him on a documentary about the Donbass conflict as well. He's very knowledgeable. He's got a lot of good things to say, so he'll be with us as well. And yeah, a lot of other good speakers that we're going to have today. So really appreciate you guys coming out. So yeah, basically we've got this schedule. We're going to go through the speakers. Probably take about 8 hours this conference. We're going to try and divide it so people don't get a little tired. We're going to divide it with songs and some breaks in between. And so yeah, a lot of different topics we're going to have. I'm going to start with a little bit of an opening speech. I'm going to freestyle it basically because I want this to be more discussion based. A lot of speakers are going to open up their speeches for Q&A at the end as well, myself included. So you guys can ask me about whatever, about our organization, what kind of work we've been doing. You can ask me about my journalistic work in Russia, and we can talk all about that. Maybe it'll be interesting for you guys. So, but I'd like to start with just kind of like why we're holding this conference in the first place, right? We're in a very interesting period in history. You guys all know the title of the conference, Media and Multipolarity. A lot of people are talking right now about the emergence of a multipolar world because for so long we've been living in this world order that could basically be described as post-Cold War, right? Where the hegemony of Western capital, specifically based in the United States, has essentially gone without serious opposition. Obviously, we saw the United States overthrow the government in Iraq, overthrow the government in Libya. We saw the bombing of Yugoslavia, all this stuff that clearly violates international law, and nobody was able to do anything about it because the United States government for so long was the law. But we're actually seeing that change, essentially. And I think, personally, the first indication of that was what happened in Syria with the Syrian civil war. The fact that that was the first major time that a power that was not within the imperialist Western core decided to help another country that was under threat by that, Russia. Russia decided to step in and help Syria in its conflict against terrorists, against ISIS, against the United States also trying to steal the resources of that country as well. And that really was the defining moment of that conflict that turned it around. Things were not looking good for the Syrian government at that time, and when Russia stepped in, everything turned around, and the Assad government is still in power. They're taking back territory in the country, doing the rebuilding process already. And now, of course, we see the Ukraine conflict. There's this, in my opinion, as a journalist, someone who's been to Donbass many times. I did even a documentary, like I mentioned before, with Jeff Monson about the Donbass conflict before Russia launched its military operation, actually, because a lot of people in the United States don't really know that the war did not start with Russia's military operation. I mean, it had been going on for 8 years before Russia launched that operation. And it got very little attention in the Western media, aside from the fact that Ukraine had a serious neo-Nazi problem. The Western media actually covered that. Until the military operation began, the script flipped, and now neo-Nazis in Ukraine are, for some reason, an invention of Russian propaganda, even though you can go back to the old articles and see all, like, even Atlantic Council has one article. I remember the title is something along the lines of, "This is not an RT article. Ukraine has a big problem with neo-Nazis." So you can go back to like 2018, 2019. That was a serious thing. It still is. And when I was there, I mean, I literally went to near where the front line was at that point before the military operation. I spoke to people who were living under constant bombardment from the Ukrainian military. Like there were no military positions in sight, and they were talking about how their children for years had lived running between the basement of their home to their school. They couldn't feel safe out in the streets. But that's all in the documentary that we're going to show during lunchtime, so we'll have some time to talk, and you guys can watch that if you want, and it's on YouTube, so you can check it out. All interviews that I did with the people there, officials who came to power after they opposed the neo-Nazi-backed coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014 that started all of this, that when they launched their anti-terrorist operation, which became essentially just a harassment campaign using artillery and really nasty neo-Nazi battalions against Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic. So I did interviews with the people who came to power in those people's republics, and they talk about the struggle they had there and everything. So we've got this situation where the Ukraine conflict is going on, and to be honest, it's the biggest flashpoint that we've seen so far in this transition from this post-Cold War world into a multipolar one. Because what are we seeing in Ukraine? Essentially, like, we're seeing the fact that the Ukrainian military is only continuing its war effort because NATO is sending all of these Western weapons to Ukraine, all of this money to keep their military budget going, tons of mercenaries. Essentially, there are like NATO troops fighting in Ukraine. They're just not doing it officially, and this is actually something that's not an uncommon thing in war, to be quite honest. Because also, even before the military operation began, there were a lot of Russian troops that volunteered individually to fight with the People's Republics against the Ukrainians, and this was something that the Western media said, oh, Russia's actually involved in the People's Republics. They weren't officially, like there wasn't Russian military mobilization there, but people took the initiative to volunteer there to fight for the people's militias there. And essentially on the Ukrainian side, NATO is doing the same thing right now. There's many people who are, soldiers connected to NATO that are volunteering as like mercenaries, or well, I guess it's different than volunteering, but they're fighting as mercenaries in Ukraine. Some are volunteering in the international corps. So we're seeing de facto a confrontation between the might of the Russian military and the might of NATO, even though it's not a direct clash that's leading to World War III yet. But so that's the time we're living in, everyone. We're living in a time where we're seeing a major geopolitical shift in our lifetime, and it's actually fascinating to watch and be in the center of. And so that's why we wanted to have this conference. As a person who works in media, we have to understand how media is changing right now as a result of this flashpoint and the change of the world order, and we also have to understand how the mediums of media are going to change as well, because I can talk a little bit about that from my personal experience, because right when the military operation began, I mean, I work at RT, I mentioned, we were completely banned in the West. There's your freedom of speech, right? And I could tell you, like, the reason we were banned, because, I mean, a lot of the stuff I was making was the reason we were banned. I mean, I went to Rostov-on-Don, which is right by the former border between Donbass and Russia, where the hostilities began, essentially. And there were thousands of people fleeing as refugees from Donbass into Russia before the military operation began. The Ukrainians had started to intensify their bombardment of Donbass. They were preparing for a decisive offensive into Donbass. They wanted to really take back that territory. And thousands of people were leaving into Russia because of that. Russia set up refugee camps. I was sent to cover that stuff. And that's essentially when push came to shove, and Russia was like, we're not gonna tolerate this pro-NATO country moving into our backyard. On top of that, murdering people who consider themselves Russians as well, because the Donbass people, I don't know if you guys know that much about the history of Ukraine, but Ukraine is not like a national, it's not homogeneous in terms of its nationalities. Like the people in Western Ukraine, the people in Western Ukraine are very ethnically different from the people in Eastern Ukraine. Like the people in Eastern Ukraine, well, former Eastern Ukraine now, they essentially speak only Russian, and they identify as Russian. And this is something also you can see in the documentary. They're nationally different, and even before all of this happened, like they had a really bad reputation with the Ukrainian authorities. They were kind of treated like the ghetto of the country, essentially, like the people who were nostalgic about the Soviet past, when in the West they were very much anti that and closer to the European Union and everything. So it's because we wanted to show people the truth about the Donbass side of what was going on, the fact that there were really like just innocent civilians being mercilessly murdered by armed neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian military, which the mainstream media was not showing. They are obviously all covering what was going on in the Ukrainian side. If you watch mainstream media these days, you see that they like really unquestionably, without question, they take information provided by the Ukrainian government and just provide it as fact, So, I mean, we tried to provide it an alternative perspective, and it was immediately banned as propaganda, as Russian propaganda, even though we were showing, videos of people suffering. How could you fabricate that? At least in the United States, it's been a little bit lighter, the censorship, but still, obviously, RT America is no longer here. But I think you can still access like some Russian media on the internet at least. But in Europe, the censorship is a lot bigger. So what we got to talk about at this conference is maybe discuss some of these new ways that alternative media is getting this information to people in the West. And to be honest, the one method that I have seen in my personal experience that I think a lot of you can attest to as well is that Telegram, the messaging app, has become much more popular in the West. And before the military operation, it was something that was pretty much exclusively Russian, I think, or like popular in the East. But now people are understanding that they can use the Telegram messaging app, which is like super secure. It's got channels, news channels. They can use this to get information that they can't get on TV or in mainstream media outlets and everything. So that's a really good thing. So we could talk about more about that in maybe in the Q&A or later on in the conference. But I also wanted to talk about the before we go on to Q&A, sort of the socioeconomic aspects of the changes that are going on in the development of this multipolar world, because not only is the United States government losing its former hegemonic status in the world, but it's the policies that the United States government has decided to pursue, not only internationally but also domestically, are ruining the internal economy as well. And the European nations, I'm just going to lump it all in the collective West, because basically Europe is just pretty much acting as the attack dog for the United States internationally. I mean, we've seen how Western sanctions against Russia have completely backfired. Like I can tell you, as someone who lives in Russia, that life in Russia essentially has not changed very much. I mean, the sanctions were supposed to really damage the economy and everything. We just don't have McDonald's. Like, McDonald's left, KFC left, and now they're just called something different, owned by Russians. So that's essentially the big change that happened. And we've seen how in the West, I mean, it's led to serious inflation. Obviously, workers in the West have to pay for these ridiculous policies. You know, the capitalist class isn't going to pay for it. We pay for it in inflation. The fact that millions and millions of dollars are going to Ukraine when they could be going to infrastructure in the United States that's crumbling. Schools could be going into medical care. It's insane that we don't have universal medical care. It's like some of the more poorer countries in the world, like, I mean, even North Korea, I mean, like, North Korea is under so much economic pressure, and they have a life expectancy of like 75 and universal health care, and they can take care of at least providing people with good medical care. In the United States, you see places where like people don't want to go to the hospital because they don't want to be debt slaves, you know? It's completely absurd when you go around the world and you see how different countries live that are much poorer than the United States actually, but the quality of life is not that much lower because they have a different system of doing things. And actually, one of the things I wanted to read some excerpts of this book to give you an idea of how different other countries in the world approach the development of their economies. It all has to do with like the overarching ideology of the society, right? This is Xi Jinping's The Governance of China. I definitely suggest, if you guys have some reading time, to read it, because specifically the third tome. This is the third tome, so there's 3 of them. The third one is the most updated. It's got the most recent information about what China's up to right now in terms of socioeconomic development, political strategy. If you read the earlier ones, it's already outdated because of how much they've accomplished over the last 10 years. It's crazy. Like, I've been to Beijing just a couple months ago, and so many Americans still think that Beijing is a place where there's like smog, it's like dirty, people are wearing masks and everything. I grew up in New York, and I gotta say that Beijing is much more populated, obviously, it's much bigger. The air quality is amazing in comparison. There's not garbage on the street. It's so well taken care of because of the way the Communist Party has organized the development of society specifically there. I've been to Shanghai also. It's like a city from the future. It's like what New York wants to become but can't. It's just insane how advanced these places are. And even as someone who isn't only living in the United States, and I read a lot about China too, but it's a different thing going there and seeing it for yourself how advanced it is. And this doesn't mean that we have to copy and paste a Chinese model into the United States, right? We're Americans. We need to have an American focus on developing our country. But we can take like the main principles for what the Communist Party is doing, like a people-centered approach. The fact that the government has economic plans, and they even have markets. Like, a lot of people say like China's actually capitalist, but that's not really true, because the markets operate under the purview of the economic plan that the Communist Party has created to develop society and bring people out of poverty. And so capital is not the ruling force over there as it is here. Profit is not the main motive. Profit is a motive in society, but the main motive is increasing the life expectancy of the people of the country. I mean, the Communist Party has brought tens of millions of people out of rural poverty through this, through these economic plans they've had. Over the past 10 years, they've lifted millions and millions and millions of people out of extreme poverty. So it's like, it's a huge accomplishment, something that we can't even imagine in the United States right now under our current system, you know. So I want to read a few excerpts just to give you an idea of how, like, how the Communist Party thinks about the development of their economy and everything, which will kind of blow out of the water the argument that like China is somehow a capitalist country. I've got a few places here, I'll just read them out loud. We must recognize that the evolution of the principal challenge facing Chinese society does not change our assessment of the present stage of socialism in China. The basic dimension of the Chinese context, that our country is still and will long remain in the primary stage of socialism, has not changed. China's international status as the world's largest developing country has not changed. The whole party must be completely clear about this fundamental dimension of our national context and must base our work on the most important reality, the primary stage of socialism. So, like, the fact is that China as a country, they're much more practical than, for example, the Soviet Union ever was, you know. And one of the problems, as someone who's studied Soviet history, for example, and the Chinese have studied very extensively Soviet history because after the collapse they were like, we don't want that to happen to us, is that, you know, leaders like Khrushchev and Brezhnev were promising full communism in 20 years. They said, you know, you weren't going to have to stand in lines for food in like 20 years because of the great achievements of the Soviet Union. And this was just like, these were dreams. This was like completely like unreasonable projecting. But the Chinese Communist Party is so practical in the understanding that like China is still a country that has extreme poverty in a lot of places. And like I said, it's improved significantly over the last 15 years, but their goal is realistic. They want to achieve what they call a moderately prosperous socialist society within the next several years, actually. And their goal to create this sort of idea that the Soviet Union had is like in 100 years, to have like a super highly technologically advanced country where, you know, there's no poverty or anything. That's like something way in the future. And only then are they talking about even considering maybe trying to understand how to get to the communist stage of historical development as, you know, they understand it in China as communists. Another thing is that they talk about, you know, here it says, our party united the people and led them in launching the great new revolution of reform and opening up, and removing all ideological and institutional barriers to our country and national development, and embarking on the path of socialism with Chinese characteristics. So it's a unique experience where the country is actually embracing reforming and opening up, and where they are actually confident in the socialist mode of production in their country, where they're like, we can challenge Western capitalism somewhat using their own rules. And it's actually been quite successful, as we see. I mean, China's on the road to be the biggest economy in the world right now. I also wanted to read some stuff about poverty alleviation also. Well, actually, before I get to that, another thing I want to also mention is the fact that in the United States, like, I feel like, and not just in the United States, in the West, a lot of people talk about Western degeneracy a lot. I mean, in the East, they talk about the West being degenerate. And what do they mean by it? Like, they mean the sort of crumbling and dissolution of understanding of like principles in society, you know, like what talking heads in American society are, you know, or at least I guess there's some conservative ones, but what talking heads are talking about, like the fact that people need to be honest and disciplined, and you know, I mean, the mainstream right now is just like instant gratification. We've become a society that's obsessed with hedonism. And the reason for that obviously is capitalism, because I mean the best way to make money is to shorten people's attention spans, feed them constant like TikTok, social media stuff where they can make massive money on advertisements and everything. This is the society we've become, and different societies that don't allow that to lead the economic development of their country, they are promoting things like, you know, just being a good person, being a productive member of society. This is stuff that I think, to be honest, like leftist movements in the West should really latch onto as well. This is what like the Communist Party in China is promoting, like party members being, quote, true believers of the ideals of communism and socialism in Chinese characteristics. They need to be upright politically and morally. They need to develop a strong sense of responsibility, adopt a correct view of their achievements, seek truth, be down to earth. There's tons of stuff about, like, I guess, like personal development that you can find in this this book that the Communist Party put out that you probably wouldn't expect to find if you didn't read it. You know, I mean, I feel like in the West we're only kind of getting that from maybe like conservatives like Jordan Peterson or stuff like that. And like the way I relate to him, I think some of the, you know, the sort of personal development stuff, like cleaning your room and getting a life together, that's good. But I mean, he uses that good piece of advice to say that also communism killed millions of people in Russia, which is just like completely wrong. As someone who understands communism, you see that he knows a lot about psychology and nothing about communism. He's read like Solzhenitsyn maybe. So that's another interesting aspect. And then, like here, they talk about. There's lots of chapters on poverty alleviation, and also I wanted to read this part because it's also an interesting take on how they're going about it, because it's not a welfare state actually. It actually sounds kind of like a little conservative, like in the way they're talking about like developing opportunities for people, you know, like teaching people how to fish instead of giving them a fish, essentially. We should improve our approach to the fight against poverty by providing jobs instead of giving grants, by rewarding and subsidizing productive activities so that the poor get more involved in poverty alleviation programs. We cannot do their work for them or simply dole out money and supplies. Instead, we must encourage more pay for more work. You know, so this is like a really different perspective on socialism than we kind of see among a lot of leftist movements in the West, you know. So I think, at least politically and with our socioeconomic understanding of the world, like, I think this view that we're seeing from more socially conservative anti-imperialist countries is a more productive one, really, because we've seen how the left, with the emergence of the new left, specifically in the United States, and all of this, like, I guess what the conservatives call cultural Marxism and stuff like that. I mean, we've seen it be a dead end, and it's easily co-opted by liberals. And we have a situation now where we've got all these leftist organizations in the United States that are basically doing footwork for the Democratic Party, because they're obsessed with non-economic problems. I mean, that's not how successful socialist movements ever were in the 20th century. So I think that's part of how we need to pivot in the emergence of the multipolar world. Also because the multipolar world, like, it's not exclusively socialist, obviously, right? Like, Russia is not a socialist country, but it's still aimed against anti-imperialism, aimed against imperialism in the West, and actually it's doing even, I would say, maybe this is a controversial take, I think even Russia is doing more against imperialism than China is doing right now. I mean, they had the guts to launch this military operation and take on the entire might of NATO, and they're ready to go farther. I mean, like, BRICS is expanding, and Russia's taking a huge role in that. They're talking about, I mean, they've vastly expanded the amount of trade that's going on between countries done in national currencies, so cornering the dollar. In the international markets. BRICS is even talking about coming up with their own international currency to challenge the dollar. This is another thing that's going on. So we're seeing all this stuff emerge, like right now. I covered the Russia-Africa Forum in St. Petersburg that happened not long ago. BRICS was super represented there, and I remember that's when they started talking about, we got to come up with, we got to get the wheels turning on the development of an international currency that BRICS controls, and also expand the use of national currencies. And this will really seriously hurt the dollar. It'll really significantly lower the influence of American imperialism around the world, and and that of their European patron states, essentially. Also, another thing, so I'm basically done, but I missed some points, so I want to talk about them as well. I also think it's great that we're seeing another wave of anti-colonial struggle in the third world. It's crazy. It's like something we haven't seen since the 1960s, 1970s, when the Soviet Union was like the main sponsor of the anti-colonial struggles in Africa. Now we're seeing like Niger, like the military just saying like, we are going to make sure that the colonialists have no more power here. And you see how the combined forces of the West are not happy about that. Mm-hmm. And Burkina Faso had already done that a while ago. They've stuck with them. There's another country too. Mali also did that, and they're talking about creating basically an anti-imperialist defensive pact in Africa. Like these are really good developments for Africa breaking its neo-colonial chains that were unfortunately a holdover from the 20th century. And also, Russia is playing a big part in that too. I wouldn't say that Russia's foreign policy is not like we're going to go intervene here, but they're working with these countries that the West is trying to harass, and they're saying, we can offer you some really good economic deals, we can be economic partners, let's get closer. At the African Russia Summit in St. Petersburg, there were essentially the entire continent was represented, and so much was accomplished at that summit. It was the second one since 2019. And there's no doubt going to be more of them. We're seeing Africa become much closer to Russia, and China, obviously. I don't know that much about China because my specialty is in Russia, but obviously we've seen how they've been forgiving a lot of debt in Africa, doing mutually beneficial, what they call win-win economic cooperation with these countries. So that's what multipolarity is all about. Like it's an anti-imperialist world that's developing. We're even seeing Russia become closer with North Korea. Like recently the Russian defense minister, he went there, met with top officials and stuff. There's even some Western media reports that now North Korea is providing Russia with military technology. I don't know how true that is, because they say a lot of things in the Western media, and I don't think Russia's confirmed or denied that or anything. But there's no doubt going to be increased cooperation between these countries that formerly were kind of isolated in the post-Cold War world, because a lot of them honestly were just afraid of what would happen to them if they got on the US's bad side. But now all that's coming to an end, and it's cool to be living in that transitory period. Really, it's really cool. So yeah, that's basically everything I wanted to say. I'm looking forward to the discussion at this conference, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Maybe you guys have comments. Maybe you don't agree with me. We could talk about that. Anyone have anything they want to say? Yeah.
I mean, I'd be interested to know like the pulse that you get of Russia itself. I mean, there's a couple concerns that you hear a lot when it's like not having a really clearly defined ideology, the vestiges of Yeltsin, the central bank. Like, what do you think is the long-term, what's going to happen internally? Because it does feel like they're sort of being held back from some internal forces right now.
I can tell you that that's even a problem that Russians are constantly talking about. They all know that that's a problem. They finding their ideological course is a little bit difficult because the government obviously is not communist or anything. They want to take what they can from the Soviet period and use it for current purposes. But I think what like the Putin administration is doing right now is trying to create a sort of more Russian national-centered ideology. Drawing from the Russian Orthodox Church, drawing on just like kind of, actually they're really taking, with the exception of the church, they're taking a lot of lessons from the Chinese. Actually, they're taking from all progressive sort of pro-national agenda episodes in Russian history and trying to connect them to the current conflict and everything. China does the same thing. The Communist Party is constantly talking about traditional Chinese values, Confucianism, and stuff like that, and it's being used in the development of the country and accomplishing the Communist Party's goals. So Russia's trying to put something like that together. I can't say that. I mean, I personally believe that things were much better than when there was like the clear ideology of socialism in the country. I personally think that. But the fact that there's like a collective struggle against the West for right now is enough. Because what happened actually is that you know, when the West launched sanctions against Russia and tried to make life there really difficult and everything, they obviously, the goal of sanctions is to immiserate the working class there so that they get upset at their own government. But what happened is that they united. Like Putin is more popular in Russia than he I think ever has been right now, because everyone feels like they're fighting a national struggle against the West right now. So yeah, so for now that's definitely more than enough to keep things together over there. Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, comments, or anything? Yeah.
What party in Russia introduced in the State Duma the special military operation resolution?
Sorry?
A party introduced in the State Duma the special military operation resolution for the intervention in Ukraine. What party did that?
What party?
Which party?
Oh, was it well? I don't know who actually lodged the original resolution, but the Communist Party was the first party in the country to say that we need to take an active intervening role in the situation. The Communist Zyuganov was the first. So who put the actual resolution? I'm not sure. It might have been United Russia, but the Communists were the ones who actually started pushing for this long before the military operation began. Yeah, and actually, the Russian Communist Party has been very active in providing aid to the people of Donbass as well. Also, like you know, helping the war effort and stuff. A lot of communists have volunteered, so the Communist Party is taking a very active role there. And they're still the second most popular and powerful party in the country, just so you guys know. So, communism, in comparison to here, is very, very popular over there. But still, like the United Russia Party is overwhelmingly popular. You know, they have like over, I think they've got like 60% popularity, probably 60 or 70.
On the subject of media getting the message out, getting banned, I don't know, what are you finding in terms of platforms, angles? What do you think is working? What do you think is going to be resilient to censorship? Do you think the new Twitter is real in terms of being less censored? Are you still getting, you know, shadow banned or held back, you think?
New Twitter is actually more free, yeah. But personally, I don't know how long that's going to last. I wouldn't rely on it as like a long-term investment of time and energy to try and build a following there. But it has been better under Elon Musk, actually. But I think really like where people like us should focus our efforts in the information war is definitely Telegram. I mean, it's like it's really open source, and the you know, other things are good like Odyssey and Rumble, but they have just really small audiences. I don't know really how that can be changed, because YouTube is just like a gigantic monolith of media, and yeah, I don't know how. That's a question I don't have an answer to. But right now, I would say Telegram is probably the best medium to get information out. Yeah. Do you have a question? Yeah.
So, two things. One about Twitter. Do you think it's possible that like one day the American elites are just going to say, you know what, we're going to cut Twitter off of all? Because you know, Elon Musk himself said that like the only reason any of his companies even exist at all is because they get government bailouts. And Twitter's no exception to this, obviously.
Yeah.
So like, do you think like, especially with Biden in power, do you think like it's inevitable that they're just going to cut off all the funding to Twitter?
Well,
And, like,
I think that Elon Musk has been really masterful at like walking this tightrope, you know, because
but to be honest, eventually, he's like, I think he himself understands that like he can't play both sides for that much longer.
maybe he
Because
does.
like
Yeah.
I know he does sense. You know, when the first day that like Elon bought Twitter, it was like total like everything goes. I remember.
Yeah.
But like now he's starting to like censor more. Not as much as Jack Dorsey Twitter.
Yeah.
But it's starting to go back to that level. And now he's introducing like literal WEF agents
Yeah.
into like the leadership of Twitter. So it's like I feel like he wants to make a compromise to those people. And like no
He
matter
has
what,
to.
no matter how many compromises he makes with the WEF and the government, he like they're still gonna oppose him at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because even his little bit of independence worries them that much. No
Yeah.
matter how much he appeases them.
But
So,
you know what I also think, like, we don't really know what's going on through Elon Musk's head, right? I mean, he could just be this sort of opposition attitude could just be part of what he's trying to do, and
I
he's
think
completely
he's
fine with working
independent.
with the government.
I just think he's an independent mind. Just look at what he posts on Twitter. It's like
Yeah.
one day he'll post something like about how we should be sending money to Ukraine or whatever,
Yeah.
and then the next day he'll like just talk about like Tesla or whatever. Like,
You know what strategy I think he's employing? I don't know if you guys have ever seen this series, but it's a really good one. It's called The Young Pope, and it's a fictional story about this. The cardinals in the Catholic Church, they elect a new pope, and it's because they elect this guy specifically because he's like the middle of the road candidate. They can't agree on anyone, so they're like, let's just choose the guy who's like the most boring and nobody knows him, and we'll try to pull his strings. And he turns out to be like super radical, and he turns out to like want to like launch a crusade. and one of his like political strategies is he's like, you know, the way that we're gonna get away with this is mystery and keeping people guessing. You know, he doesn't show his face publicly. He does all this random stuff so that people can't keep their finger on him. I think it's similar with Elon Musk.
and then my other question was like, what do you make of Rumble and like what's going on there? And because Rumble's in Canada, like, do you think it's inevitable that they're going to be shut down by the government there?
I mean, I didn't know it was based in Canada, and yeah, I don't know that much about Rumble, but
I know that in Romania you cannot access it.
yeah,
You cannot.
Really?
that's crazy. Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, Odyssey and Rumble are good because they're alternatives to YouTube, but I don't put that much stock in them, to be honest, either. Because
Well, RT does stream on.
yeah, because
Rumble, so at least it's a step up from YouTube.
yeah, they just don't have any other choice though. I would love a better alternative to those things. They're, like I said, low audience, and they're also subject to government influence and pressure and stuff. You know, so unfortunately.
Yeah, but in Europe, I mean, any information like from the Russian side, it's banned, so you cannot access it. Like you cannot access Google, you cannot access RT, you cannot, whatever means, Russian media, you cannot access it.
Yeah, even on Telegram in a lot of places, which is important to note. But that's why that's why media outlets like ours are important.
Yes,
Because we're American.
Yes.
So, what were you gonna say?
I wonder if these anti-censorship video platforms like Rumble and Odyssey, they might have like a bit more potential than we think they do because YouTube censorship is getting so insane. Like there's one woman on YouTube who she's a food scientist, and she makes these videos debunking these dangerous life hacks that have caused like serious injury or even death in people, and her videos have even gotten censored and demonetized and all that. And
Yeah.
even like these normie pop history YouTube channels will have to like sort of dance around censorship and all that. Like they'll have to say like no Germany instead of Nazi Germany.
No, Germany. Yeah, I've seen that. I saw people start doing that. I was like, what the hell?
So like, I wonder if all the extreme censorship rules and having to use like weird euphemisms and all that will just push more people off of YouTube. Like, do you think there's potential for that, or do you think YouTube's too big of a monopoly?
I think as long as there's all that money in YouTube, it's not going to change. I think our language will change first. The next generation is going to be calling Nazi Germany no Germany. Like people are going to be just like, I mean that's kind of what that's kind of what influences language. We've seen language change with the emergence of the internet, and it's become more like dumbed down, I guess.
You hear people like say unalive instead of kill.
Yeah, unalive. Yeah. Like it starts as a joke, right? But then people start saying it like normally.
Yep.
And so I really think that will just. I don't think YouTube will lose influence from that. I think they're just going to contribute to the changing of language. Yeah, Eddie.
I got to interview Christian Parenti last week, and I wondered what you think of his analysis. I asked him what in the media and with censorship has changed since his father, Michael Parenti, wrote Inventing Reality in 1993.
Yeah.
The big difference, he said, is with the internet, there's more direct government censorship, whereas the big three media outlets used to do it for the capitalist class, but now with the internet, the government is actually intervening, which we've seen on TikTok a bunch with hiring a bunch of NATO operatives and canceled 320,000 Russian accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's curious what you think of that.
Well, I would agree with that. Yeah, because like for some reason, well, it's I guess it's normal, but along with the convenience of use of this information for us comes the convenience of censorship for the government. I mean, it's like much easier than like. Why do people not really watch TV anymore either? It's just not as convenient as watching something on the internet, it's a lot easier for the government to censor things over that medium. It's just a lot more accessible to everyone. I mean, TV, at least when people tried to ban TV channels in the 20th century, it really wasn't that easy. You could take them off the air, but especially in Europe during the Cold War. You could take them off the air, but people could still listen from over the Iron Curtain, and then governments were setting up jammers, so that you couldn't hear it. It was a bit more complicated. So, I just think with the more ease of use of a technology also comes the easier censorship of it, I think, in terms of the internet. But I guess there's the dark web and stuff, but I guess we have to learn how to use that for media purposes.
But that's all CIA psyop anyways. Like,
Yeah.
Tor and stuff, like that was literally created
A CIA
by
project,
USAID and stuff.
Yeah. So, can't trust that either.
I was thinking we should all get our shortwave radio licenses.
Hey,
Yeah.
radio operators, let's go.
Dude, like
We do it.
I think about that sometimes, like you want to get around like government surveillance and censorship and stuff, let's go back to analog. Analog technology. Nobody's paying attention to that right now.
Passenger Pigeon News Network.
There you go.
Yeah, but all this talk of government censorship on the internet, 'cause it's so easy, it really reminds me how important it is to have these in-person events.
Yeah.
It's so much harder for them to censor us when we're in person. We don't have to rely on the internet or anything. We can just actually talk with each other like face to face.
Yeah, it's really important. It's good also for people to have meetings at their homes and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I live all the way in Russia. I wish I could do it more often with you guys, but I'm really happy we were able to set up this conference. So
Definitely.
So yeah, I think I'll yield to the next speaker. We'll have the song and then Alex will come on.
Yeah, we'll have to join Alex from
All right.
UK.
All right, cool. Thank you, everybody. So yeah, we'll take like 5-10 minute break, play a little song.
Is the bathroom over here?
There's one
Guys can
there.
use the bathroom, talk amongst yourselves.
I love the bit. I mean, maybe being just upright. Even going through external the main things that they talked about it doesn't get involved necessarily by here's what's happening and here's all this. It's like they're the most honest, they're the most upright, they weren't fucking around with people, they weren't wrong with people. And it's crazy to think how far some of that new left generation pulls. You just can't like complete
like, and the Red Army too. Actually, I read a lot about this. Tons of people were invited to the Communist Party not because they're like they knew everything about communism, it's because they're like honest, upright people who were like fighters and who showed heroism on the battlefield. Like, how are you supposed to build a revolutionary party with people who are not like they were like that's like the first step. It's sort of like that's why I say like Jordan gave us the start picking up their that's kind of good advice for
It's all based off of, it's based off of like, so you're familiar with like George Soros, like, so the name Open Society for me, I don't know if that's Carl Popper Society, and Carl Popper wrote about how in a liberal open society, they should not allow it. That's why they call it open. So the name Open Society Foundation comes from that open society and the point is that the whole point of like neoliberalism as a project is that it's the oligarchy of liberalism. So the thing is that classical liberalism so what it is that liberalism without the ideas of the oligarchy that's very happens with the ideas of all dead, no constitution, no second. If George Washington were alive today, he would not support anything that America. The point is, because George Washington famously said, no untangling the lines before. Washington is not supporting George Washington is not supporting drug dealers. The problem is that we stray so far away.
As if
that it
there's
doesn't
all this really submitted that parking lot,
Is that even just about like regular people? Just in the
That's
outdoors.
awesome. What have you have to do?
Like a lot of people have
Oh, come on, okay.
We'll do some fun for them. The point is they're trying to erode it. They're trying, but that's our constitution. That's our oligarchy wants to get rid of it.
I think that alone is like such an unpleasant feeling.
But what I'm trying to say is that we have that constitution. Our elite want us they want us to stand on our 2 feet.
I always end on not doing avenging do something.
That's I come back like every year.
That's like, I don't know much
I
about
haven't been back in 2 years, but all I know is that it's been every year, and it's weirder and weirder for me to be in New
like the
York.
social
It's and then you have like people running around in like colorful outfits, smoking weed, shooting at like it's like and then these are the same people that say that that's the best city in the world. They really believe that. How
well, I'm thinking Romania, just like other Eastern European countries, they're complacent. That's the word I would say. Complacent. The Romanian social democrats, they really don't give a shit. They really don't give a shit.
They just ride the subway. Ride the subway like social media is
randomly killing each other,
yeah,
throwing themselves in
Two guys get like that's like super average started trying to say for no reason.
like there's now a new trend where like kids are just punching people sleeping in elementary or punching them in it's like
Worst case scenario. I heard stories about like in Russian it's just kind of like lawlessness and everybody themselves. And then obviously
yeah, if like the smile sign to here is pretty good. Because they give you the TRR and some plants. Yeah,
I love the history and everything, but
But yeah, I can't do that.
I guarantee you,
It was good. Like the first like 20 minutes, I was good.
I guarantee you, like, you probably know what I'm talking about. Most people are hypothetical. All the parties, all the major parties, like in Albania, all the major parties are pro EU. But not because of like any ideological position, but because like the elites, they know the EU, so they're pro EU because they want to fight. And like the people of Albania are super apathetic and they don't give a shit. So it's like it's considered repressive. So it's part of that's kind of how a lot of these Eastern European countries are. Serbia is kind of like
Comical ironic video talking about how Americans really actually resemble what they say North Korea is like.
Well, the money is for the elite. It's never for
We have like campaigns in Florida. They think that like North Korea is just a great kind of
obviously the investments are going into the pockets of politicians and stuff. I mean, because clearly like Romania and Albania are not developing at all. And you have to understand that, I kind of see Serbia as like a bastion. They're like the one like not EU, that whole.
Oh wow, look at this.
From the outside and unity inside. These, I mean,
And that's why they're trying to break out.
I wish.
Lava, this is you, isn't it?
I think it's from living units. The absolute dissolution of them. Furthest back. Unifying ideology. Oh, there is something. They're sovereign. They got new.
Exactly. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. Everyone's like, and that's why it's hilarious. Why the mainstream media is always like, oh, North Korea's free.
On YouTube. Yeah.
That's why
Right there. Passing over here.
Like they know shows their path.
So far, 16. It's not bad. More will be on there.
And I totally admire that.
Oh, it's good angle. I posted on Twitter.
Gratifying.
Live. I posted it on
Yeah,
Instagram.
no, but it's like when people talk about like, I've done a lot of research on this. There's a lot of people, like in the West, one of the big justifications is they always bring up Serbia. Academics always say, we have to continue being because or else like supremacy will happen.
I see
You
it
understand that it's connected to this broader goal.
Yeah.
Leading the nation, rising the nation, like.
That's why there's no instability.
We always say like, if we don't intervene, supremacy will happen or
It's
whatever.
fascinating.
And
That's why I'm really happy that Russia.
I don't care. I
Because
think,
the government over there for a long time is doing.
I don't, I think that the whole story behind supremacy in the first place is like, people don't know the facts of this shit. I think everything in Serbia was self-defense. Everything was self-defense. And like in reality, like who would want like Wahhabis in their country funded by the West? Like it was really Bosnian Wahhabis.
I got a lot of beef with them.
But, credit.
I gotta try one of these now.
Oh, they're amazing. They're dangerous.
He's not like.
Alright, let's see how good these really are.
At a certain point, they're frozen.
Is that a little bit like pretzel on the outside?
It takes a while.
It's like toffee or something like that.
Because in all honesty, come on. Like the West tries to make it look like Hitler, dude. If
No,
there are
they
plenty of
did.
other people that, if they were in power, things would have went a lot differently.
Reaching over for the nuke button every time.
Yeah, like
You guys have Wi-Fi or no? Slava knows the.
Okay, well that's
when I saw
Slava.
how the military operation was launched, I was like, okay, I think
Slava,
it's
do
a
the
bad
Wi-Fi.
idea, but they probably know better than I do. But because their priority was to preserve like civilian lives, I get that. But I think more civilians have died now as a result of it. They should have just like parked bombs.
Yeah, I mean, this is again. It's like he's like a boomer, but he's no dad. He's not like
What's
so
Romania?
fucking
What I find interesting
able
is
to
like,
move with the times. But he's not.
I wonder
Yeah.
if
He's
people
no
from
Yeltsin
Romania
clearly,
touch
and
this
he has like a profound.
like in like in Serbia for example, a lot of
The
people
Russian
are
people, he realizes now
they use the term
finally that like
nostalgia. And in like pretty much every
Yeah,
country,
exactly.
in pretty much every
Now
form
they
of
so-
nostalgia, except for Croatia,
I just
you go nostalgia. Everything is pretty good.
yeah.
But it's like, I wonder if
There's a lesson.
but
There is.
Yeah.
They should get the conference.
I'm not even.
So if you want to just.
Slava, Alex is ready? I guess we're still on schedule. But
Yeah, we're good. We got 1 minute, and then Alex.
Alright, sounds
Yeah,
good. I think it's speech.
Oh, yeah, it was good. Very good, very good. Yeah.
I feel like that was crazy how my job is helping me provide.
Yeah, no, you did great.
You know, I heard like I remember reading a couple of years ago that like Romania banned the Communist Party. And, like,
So you want to hang on to
what
this
happened?
just so you can
Yeah.
really learn about them, because I'm not
How
sure
they
what
banned
it's
the Communist Party.
Yeah, I'll do
a couple of years
that.
ago.
So he's ready right this second.
So he's loaded up right here. He doesn't have the camera on right now, but that's him.
Well, do they still exist?
Oh, sorry.
Hey Alex, we're gonna come to you in a couple minutes, alright?
I've been trying to find information.
Alex, how would you like us to introduce you?
Just say of Marx, Engels, Lenin Institute and Class Consciousness Project. Those are the two things I'm principally working on.
Alright, sounds good. Great.
Alex.
Alright guys, we're gonna go to our next speaker now.
Alex, come here.
As you can see on the schedule, next we have up Alexander McKay. He's working with Marx, Engels, Lenin Institute and the Class Consciousness Project. They're a couple of very good anti-imperialist Marxist news outlets like TRR. And he's coming in from the UK, so he's going to give his talk over video call. So Alex, yeah, please take it away. We're all ears.
Right, greetings comrades all the way from Manchester in the post-industrial northwest of England. I'm very happy to speak to you today on a very important subject of course, the emerging multipolar world, and we're touching on the issues of free speech or the lack of it as well, and how to get our message out there in a very, well, increasingly restricted media environment. But I would be lacking in my duties if I didn't begin my talk today by stating, along with I'm sure all of you, full solidarity with the resistance of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
And it's very appropriate that we start with that because, of course, the situation in occupied Palestine is very much a creation of British imperialism. And it is British imperialism which sponsored Zionism in the early days, both just before and after World War I, in order to create, in the words of one British colonial official, a little loyal Jewish Ulster. That's a direct quote from the military governor of occupied Palestine in the late 1900s, a guy called Ronald Storrs. You can still find his book online. And that was the aim of Britain sponsoring the Zionist project back then. And so when US imperialism inherited the management of the Zionist state, that is an aim that was taken on, a project that was taken on by the US imperialists, but the design and the inception of it came from British imperialism. And so it is now to British imperialism that I want to turn. And I want to talk a little bit about the role British imperialism plays within the US-led imperialist bloc and why the British ruling class is increasingly terrified of the emerging multipolar world. And then I want to talk a little bit as well about the European Union and why that has to be seen as an integral part of the US imperialist bloc and not some kind of independent element, as some leftists in Britain and Europe have insisted upon seeing it as. And I'm going to explain a little about why that is inaccurate. But first, let's start with my own homeland, which is, of course, Britain, and the oldest continually existing capitalist state, not the first, of course. The Italian Renaissance states, I would argue, beat Britain to the honor, shall we say, of becoming the first capitalist state. But Britain is the oldest continually existing capitalist state, the oldest continually existing imperialist power, the oldest or the first to manifest all the signs of imperialist decay, as outlined by Lenin in his classic text of 1916. including a predominance overwhelmingly in terms of trade of export of capital rather than commodities, accompanied by, of course, an extremely violent and repressive system, both overseas and, of course, to restrain the domestic working class, accompanied by the now compulsory deindustrialization that goes along with imperialism, which, of course, Britain was leading the way on all the way back before World War I, as Lenin correctly observed. But turning to British imperialism and its role within the US imperialist bloc, what does it actually do within this bloc? And I would argue that ever since at least 1945 and the end of World War II, which saw the British ruling class, although they weren't conquered by Nazi Germany, they were bankrupted by the war and had to fund the restoration of their country and the concessions they made to the British working class via two methods. One was, of course, the increased hyper-exploitation of the colonized nations, particularly nations like Kenya and what's now known as Malaysia, and of course loans from US imperialism, which the British ruling class took until, I believe, the early 2000s to fully pay back. So the consequence of being bankrupted and being unable to hang on to their colonial possessions, thanks to the dramatic successes of the anti-colonial revolution after World War II, personified by, of course, the British being forced out of India, which is something they never wanted to happen. But they were, of course, left in a situation due to mass resistance of the Indian proletariat and peasantry. They had no choice but to leave. But they then had to accept, particularly after their disastrous attempt at securing independent possession of the Middle East in 1956 in the Suez Crisis, where they were outwitted and outmaneuvered by Gamal Abdel Nasser. They were forced to take a subordinate role to US imperialism. And by that I mean that if they wanted, that is the British, to maintain their position in the world as the leading place where finance capital operated out of in the 50s and 60s and 70s and into the 80s, Britain and the City of London was even more of a center of financialized capitalism than the United States was. And if they wanted to keep that, though, if they wanted to keep the ability to move their capital into any country in the world and exploit any resource or source of labor in the world, then they needed to have the military and diplomatic support of US imperialism. They couldn't do it without it. Now, Stalin made the very correct observation after World War II that the US had put Europe on rations. That is to say that the US was prepared to tolerate the Europeans engaging in what Kwame Nkrumah correctly identified as neo-colonialism in order to maintain their economic domination over their former colonies. But they, of course, had to give up the direct military occupation of these countries. But the US was more than prepared to indulge Britain and France and the Dutch to an extent in preserving a neo-colonial domination over all of these countries. And that is how the British ruling class has continued to profit from the relationship with US imperialism, because they are not able to secure all of the markets they seek to dominate on their own. They need US imperialism's backing in terms of military and diplomatic support in order to do so. And for that reason, they are terrified by the idea of US imperialism retreating and withdrawing from its, what you would call, global hegemony, their global hegemonic role. And it is necessary not just for the British, but also the French, the Germans, and the whole EU project, that US imperialism maintains this dominant role, this dominant hegemonic role, because they are all directly benefiting from it. Now, sticking with the British for now, the British in the Ukraine war, which I'm sure has been mentioned already, have taken the role of the most enthusiastic cheerleaders for this project, not just since the Russian special military operation began in 2022, but going all the way back to, of course, the immediate period following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Recently, of course, we've seen the controversy erupt into even the bourgeois public sphere over the exiled Canadian Ukrainian Nazi Yaroslav Hunka and his friends. Well, who sent them to Canada? It was British imperialism that was leading the way on that, with the US following along behind. And this shows that the British imperialism has a long-term interest in supporting the most extreme fascistic elements in Ukraine in order to use them as a weapon, first against the Soviet Union, and then, as is now admitted by almost everybody behind closed doors, as a weapon against post-Soviet Russia. And Britain has been integral to this, as the reporting of people like Kit Clarenberg, who writes for the Grey Zone, who I've had on my program before. He has chronicled a lot of this stuff, as has Mark Curtis from Declassified UK. Britain has been an enthusiastic supporter of Banderism, of Ukrainian fascism, for a very long time, since at least the 1940s, arguably back to even before then, in the period of the 1930s and the early days of the Soviet Union. So Britain's had a long-term role in supporting Banderism and fascism in Ukraine, and they've had a long-term role in destabilizing Ukraine. They were integral to the Orange Revolution, so-called Orange Revolution in 2004. They were integral to the Maidan coup in 2014. And of course, they played a crucial role in the form of Boris Johnson, who was acting as Joe Biden's enthusiastic messenger boy when he delivered the ultimatum to Zelensky in April of 2022 to carry on the war against Russia no matter what, and that he had no right essentially to sign any kind of peace treaty. And this isn't just because the British ruling class are bloodthirsty, privately educated sociopaths who would sell their own mothers for money, even though they are all of those things. It is because the role of Britain in the world is dependent upon the continued existence of US unipolarity. They have to maintain that, or push the US to maintain that position, because if the US withdraws, if it goes through some sort of internal crisis and retreats from Europe especially and pulls the plug on NATO, then Britain as an imperialist power is finished. There's no way that the British ruling class can sustain themselves in the position they are currently in via their own resources. They can't do it. Without US imperialism leading the way, not just, of course, with British imperialism, but French imperialism, German imperialism as well, all of these powers that were bankrupted or destroyed by World War II, as going back to Stalin's quote again, they were put on rations and got back on their feet by US imperialism after 1945. But now they are completely dependent upon US imperialism. Without US imperialism, the British can't maintain their positions in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia or South America. And if you look at some of the biggest British companies, including the mining giant Rio Tinto, and where they operate in the world, these are all places which are much more subjected to US military domination than they are British military domination, because the British ruling class no longer funds a military that is sizable enough in order to carry out the level of repression needed to maintain their interests around the world. They're dependent upon US power. And so their game in Ukraine, the British, has been to continually up the ante, to continually try to push the Ukrainians into carrying out ever more desperate attacks on Russian infrastructure, particularly the Crimean Bridge. They're particularly obsessed with that. But they are working together with the most hardline elements in Washington, D.C., desperate to make sure that this war goes on, and that at least now it is not seen as being a humiliating defeat for the West. And to that end, they are prepared, as the Dutch defense minister recently observed, to fight Russia cheaply. And in the view of the British imperialists and the Europeans, the Ukrainian lives are very, very cheap and very, very disposable. And in order to maintain their position, and in order to maintain the position of US imperialism, their ultimate patron, they're willing to feed the entirety of Ukraine into the maws of destruction. And that is a completely, of course, cold-blooded and barbaric point of view, but it expresses in a honest way, in some senses, the nakedness of the class interests in play here. And this is what more people need to be aware of. The role of Britain in the world is shrouded in propaganda and garbage from the capitalist press in Britain. Very rarely does the truth come out. Now, one interesting aspect when the truth started leaking out was, of course, over the British relationship with the European Union. And I want to touch on Brexit a little bit because I'm aware that it made a certain amount of headlines in the United States. Brexit arose because of a contradiction within the British ruling class that they weren't able to resolve. And there were those in the British ruling class who thought that they could steer a more independent line as an imperialist power by aligning themselves much more closely with a unified European bloc, and that this would then help them to counterbalance the power of US imperialism. The other side of the British ruling class thought that the only way that they could sustain themselves was to have an ever closer alliance with US imperialism, but that they didn't need to have one with the Europeans. Now, of course, this was a case of massive miscalculation on both factions' behalf. The pro-European faction were mistaken because they saw the European Union as being something that was independent of US imperialism, whereas, of course, US imperialism was enthusiastic about the project of European unity back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, even though they didn't want to see it develop in any sense into an independent bloc that could be a rival to them. Now, they had no real fears on that part because the feebleness of French and German and Italian capitalism meant that it was never going to develop into an independent bloc that could challenge US imperialism. But to go back to the mistakes of the British ruling class, this pro-European part thought that they could operate within the EU as a counterweight to the US. They could operate as an independent imperialist power. This is mistaken, as the current events in Ukraine and the attitude of the Europeans towards it is showing. But the other half were equally mistaken. They believed that by tying themselves ever closer to the US and just the US, that they could help sustain US power in the world more effectively. Now, the attitude of Obama on this actually summed up the attitude of the dominant section of the US ruling class, which is that he came out and publicly opposed Brexit because he understood very well that the role of the British within the EU is to get in the way of any attempt at making the EU into anything that could even remotely endanger the interests of US imperialism, to make sure it remains firmly under control. And that was the disruptive role that Britain was to play within the EU, or the EEC as it used to be. And that is the role that Charles de Gaulle, former president of France, feared that it would play. But in the end, everybody was wrong. And in the end, the British working class took the opportunity, for a variety of reasons, to vote against what they saw as the dominant section of the elite. Just as in the United States, a section of the working class would vote for Donald Trump, just to stick it in the eye of what they viewed as the dominant section of the US ruling class. And of course, this exploded out into public debate, a lot of contradictions, including with regard to the role of the EU, and suddenly you got a degree of politicization within the working class that you hadn't seen before. And so this laid bare some central problems for British capitalism, in that without being inside the EU, it wasn't going to get access to as strong a selection of trade deals, for instance. And here I'll pivot slightly to talking a little bit more about the European Union, because the role of the European Union in the post-1991 world, after the fall of the Soviet Union, was to essentially act as a collective grouping for the ruling classes of Europe in order that they could better exploit the natural resources and the labor, particularly of the African nations. And if you look at the revolts that have gone on recently in Niger, and before that Mali and Burkina Faso, the role of French imperialism is central to these revolts. But of course, the European Union is central to it as well, because they are the ones who collectively negotiate these trade deals with the African nations. They are the ones who impose underdevelopment on these countries. For instance, it is the case with the EU trade deal with Kenya, for instance, the Kenyan coffee beans can't be processed and turned into the finished product in Kenya. They have to be extracted and sent in their unprocessed form to Europe, mainly Italy and France, where they're processed and turned into a finalized product, a final commodity to be sold on the shelves. The trade deals that the European Union collectively bargains for with the African nations always seek to keep the African nations in a state of underdevelopment, as economists like Samir Amin have identified in the past. And that is the role of the EU when it comes to African nations in particular, but other less developed nations as well. The aim of the European Union is to act as a collective body for enforcing the will of the European ruling classes, and that class interest is in keeping the less developed nations in the world underdeveloped. And that is why you see now an increasing number of European states, France and Germany and Italy being the lead economic powers of the European Union bloc, starting to turn more and more hostile towards the People's Republic of China. Because the role that the People's Republic of China is playing, as even bourgeois experts such as Deborah Brautigam have analyzed in the books that she has written, I think one of them is called The Gifts of the Dragon, chronicling the relationship between China and the African nations, is that the Chinese have actually been investing in infrastructure development and real terms economic development of the African nations. And this is something which, of course, the EU very much does not want to see. In order for their profits to be maintained, the super profits they obtain by keeping the African nations subordinated and subjugated and underdeveloped, they can't have this amount of development take place. So even though Germany and France and Italy have been making very profitable deals and doing very profitable business inside China and with China for 40 years now, it is the case that they are turning increasingly hostile, not just because the US is ordering them to, even though they are, but because their interests in the African nations are being threatened by Chinese investments and infrastructure development. They are making it so these nations are becoming less backward, they're developing more balanced economies, or they're trying to, and that is too much for European imperialism. The European Union, as a political and economic project, was created in order that the imperialist powers of the ruined European nations after World War II could maintain their influence, with ultimately the US imperialists standing behind them and backing them up. And here I want to turn to the illusion of European strategic independence. Now, this has always been something which liberal utopians in both Europe and in Britain have dreamed would be the case, that one day the European Union would be able to develop into a power in its own right. Now, of course, US imperialism never wanted to see something that was their creation turn into a rival, but I would argue that was always very unlikely. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, the Europeans became very keen on taking in the former socialist countries, the former people's democracies, into the EU, with a view to, of course, being able to exploit their resources. Now, as a consequence of that, many of these countries got deindustrialized. If you look at the effects of EU membership and capitalist restoration in places like the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, you see a drastic collapse in the birth rate, mass migration out of the country, and a general de-development and deindustrialization of these countries. And that, of course, suited the agenda of the Europeans just fine. They could have access now to a vast pool of very well-educated labor that they could bring into Western Europe and Britain at the time and use as cheap labor, particularly in the service industry. So for them, this was a great innovation. But it also, because the comprador ruling classes of places like the Baltic states, Poland, and places like the Czech Republic, but the Baltic states and Poland in particular, these are all countries which are very much tied to US imperialism. So in actual fact, it ended up further reinforcing US control over the EU bloc. And the attempts by the EU to exert itself in, for instance, the imperialist war upon Yugoslavia in the early to late 90s, always ended with the US stepping in and settling this crisis on its terms. The EU tried to settle the Croatian and Bosnian wars, and the US blocked it at every turn, and the EU meekly accepted it. Why? Because the EU has no capacity to get itself involved in a fight with US imperialism. They're too dependent upon US imperialism. There was this brief moment when Jacques Chirac and Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, did object to the US and British-led invasion of Iraq, but it was in fairly mild terms, and that dissent was snuffed out inside the political systems of France and Germany pretty quickly. The immediate successor of Jacques Chirac, who was kind of like the last flurry of Gaullism, was of course Nicolas Sarkozy, the convicted criminal who's still hanging around. But he was, of course, relentlessly pro-US. His successor, the deeply feeble Hollande, was even more pro-US. And of course, Macron, despite his periodic outbursts of whinging, is a complete doormat for US imperialism. And the same is true in Germany. Merkel, for a while, tried to sustain some kind of German independent line, but this completely collapsed with her departure from office. And in reality, the weaknesses of German capitalism just further subordinated Germany to US imperialism. So the idea of the European Union as some kind of independent entity is completely false. It has always been an institution that is dominated by US imperialism. It's composed of countries which were either ruined after World War II and that the US directly rebuilt and put back on their feet again, and as a consequence have dominated them through long periods ever since then. And in the East, it's made up of a lot of countries whose political elites and ruling classes are completely subservient to US imperialism. The sole exception, of course, being perhaps Hungary, where Orban is a reactionary who likes to plow his own furrow, so to speak. And who knows what will happen in Slovakia with the emerging government of Robert Fico. Maybe some differences will arise there, but both of those are still countries which are very much tied into the US imperial system, even if they might have rows with the United States every now and again. So this idea of European Union independence and this idea of, in Joseph Borrell's terms, the garden, is of course a massive amount of illusions. And unfortunately though, illusions are one thing that the US imperialist bloc is very good at selling. The illusion of what EU membership would bring to Ukraine, for instance, was powerful enough, along with the enormous influencing operations that the US, Britain, and the EU countries undertook in Ukraine to motivate many of those who came out to support the Maidan movement. It also animated the illusions of those who support Pashinyan in Armenia and his disastrous regime. So this is a place which, although it does not have strategic independence, it does not present an independent way forward away from US power, but is integral to it. It still is able to spin a lot of illusions to people. I mean, the first time I spoke to Don on the podcast that I do was when he was reporting from Tbilisi, Georgia, where the Europeans and the US have invested an awful lot in so-called civil society operations, as they did in Ukraine, as they have done in Armenia, where they saturate the information space with propaganda, where they recruit and train activists in the gene-sharp methods of color revolutions. And they essentially, due to the weaknesses of the Georgian or Armenian or Ukrainian ruling classes, are able to completely replace the domestic public sphere with one that is wholly imported from the EU, from Britain, from the US, and from Canada. So the EU is a very good shop window for US imperialism. It portrays an image of Europe that is rooted often, I find, in the illusions about the social democratic past. I mean, you heard it from Joseph Borrell when he was rambling through his description of Europe as a beautiful garden. about how Europe has found this balance between markets and the welfare state, and that's why everybody wants into this beautiful garden of ours. And of course, he's spinning lies, because the social democratic elements within the European states started to die off at least 40 years ago. I mean, your very own Senator Sanders, the saint of Burlington, was rambling on in 2016 and 2019 and 2020 about the Swedish model. Well, the Swedish model no longer exists. The Swedish model of social democracy was fatally damaged by the collapse of Swedish collective bargaining over 40 years ago now. Now they've had relentless pro-capitalist governments ever since that have cut back what the working class of Sweden gains to the absolute bone. So this idea of Nordic social democracy is, in Sweden's case, very much dead. In the case of Denmark and Finland, is on the way out as well. What's left in Norway is only sustained by the royal money. But this is the European Union now. It's not so much of a garden, more of a hall of mirrors, or a series of fatal illusions which are still sold to people. And as the multipolar world emerges, of course, the European ruling classes are stuck. They don't know what to do. They are revealing themselves more and more to not have any independent capacity for action whatsoever. They all jumped into this crusade that the US imperialists launched in Ukraine. There's no deviation away from the wholehearted and enthusiastic backing for the Banderist regime in Kiev and for the actions of the US imperialists. There's whinging behind closed doors, but to reiterate my point, they don't break away from the US, because without the US, they are finished in the rest of the world. There are some multipolar theorists and who think that Europe can transition its way into a place inside a multipolar world. I say that that is an over-optimistic view. In reality, the ruling classes of all of the major European nations and Britain will go along with the US to the absolute bitter end. The only way that the working class of any of the European nations or Britain is going to be able to get out and forge a new place for ourselves in the world is by the overthrow of these ruling classes. These ruling classes are so far gone, so parasitic, so completely dependent upon US imperialism that their capacity for independent action has all but disappeared. The only way forward is to drive through them, so to speak. And I'll move now just to commenting upon the media atmosphere and the atmosphere that this has created, because it has got significantly worse as the power of British imperialism and European imperialisms have weakened over the years. 15 years ago or so, or perhaps more accurately 20 years ago, when there were open divisions within the British ruling class over the way forward, particularly over the Iraq War, it was possible to find dissenting voices inside the major capitalist media outlets. I mean, you would get a dissenting column or two in the opinion pages of The Guardian, for instance. We all remember, of course, that the work of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks was reported in The Guardian, as it was, I believe, in the New York Times. And there was criticism even of the British security state and the British military in the pages of even some of the more establishment newspapers like the Daily Mail, and even the Murdoch press, up until around about 2010. It is after the gigantic crisis of capitalism that ran from around about late 2007 through to 2010, and I would argue has actually continued to this day, that the atmosphere inside the bourgeois press in Britain got much, much more restrictive. You saw the faked up charges against Julian Assange, the attempt to shut down WikiLeaks, but this was also followed by a relentless exertion of ever greater control over the legacy media outlets, over print media, over the radio, and over television broadcasting, both terrestrial and satellite. As the amount of alternative news sources online, of course, mushroomed, and as people started finding news sources through social media networks, the state in Britain took an ever greater control over the media. It already had a good degree of control over the British bourgeois press. Britain actually has some of the most restrictive anti-free speech laws in the world. They're just not usually used openly. They usually do things behind closed doors. And this is how the British ruling class had operated. But they've, since the WikiLeaks affair, they've come out into the open and they've been much more dramatic in terms of their assertion of control over the press. The Guardian got their offices raided about 10 years ago. They took all the Snowden files that they had. And ever since then, the Guardian has never deviated very much from the line as dictated by the British government. And we also see this, of course, in the fact that the British government are some of the leading influencers, shall we say, in the so-called disinformation programs that I'm sure all American comrades are aware of, because they exploded after the election of Trump in 2016 and after Brexit here also in 2016. The British government started funding all kinds of so-called anti-disinformation bodies, which were actually, of course, propaganda bodies. It's the 77th Brigade of the Ministry of Defence, which is a psychological operations team that had people operating inside Twitter, for instance. The British government is relentless in pursuing restrictions in online media, or trying to restrict online media that they find too offensive. Of course, we've seen the banning of Russia Today and Press TV in Britain. So the clampdown is relentless, and it is across the board in Europe. And I would say it all comes from the fact that the ruling class understand that their positions are becoming more and more vulnerable. And therefore they are, as their crisis deepens and as their own legitimacy fades away, they seek to exert ever greater control over the traditional media and the online media, which of course means it gets difficult to operate if you go beyond a certain level. Many of those who occupy the online media space are aware that we're only allowed to do what we do because our number of followers might be in the thousands, but we're not breaking through as yet. I mean, regardless of whatever one thinks of the charges that were made against Russell Brand, the fact is that the state went after him, not because of anything that he might have done in his past, but because he had a multi-million strong platform that he used to put alternative media voices on that platform, people like Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, for instance. That's why the British state and the British state media, essentially, that's what it is, went after him, not because of what he may or may not have done in these Hollywood days. So this is the situation, which is that the British ruling class will move against anybody who gets a mass audience. Again, they're prepared to say that they allow free speech, but only as long as you don't reach the masses. As long as you remain in a cul-de-sac somewhere, they're prepared to tolerate you. And this all comes back down to insecurity. The system is more insecure. They know very well that the material benefits that the British working class gained from the period of reform after World War II have long been in retreat. The working class incomes in Britain have stood still for almost 40 years, that the life in Britain becomes ever more expensive, and the number of people who are actually gaining out of the system diminishes every year. And all the British ruling class can do is carry out more repression, try and slap down dissenting voices using the power of the state, try and censor people out of existence. That's their only tool. Repression is the only thing that they have left to them. Repression and, of course, psychological operations. And I will conclude by bringing it back to the issue of multipolarity. Whether the Chinese and the Russians meant for their emergence as more truly independent powers in the world to fundamentally challenge the existing system or not, that is in effect what has happened. And the attempts by the British and European ruling classes to maintain their position are pushing them only into an ever more dependent relationship with US imperialism. And the illusion of European independence, the idea of the EU being some kind of independent power, that has all gone. Now we see that the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Spanish, and the British, regardless of whether they're in the EU or not, are welded to the US imperialist apparatus. When it goes down, we will go down as well. Unless, of course, those of us who are communists, who are seeking to organize ourselves within the British working class, reaching people through independent media platforms, intervening in struggles when and where we can to try and build up, again, a new level of class consciousness and a new level of working class organization. Only by doing that we're going to be able to move forward. There is no way to rescue the current system. The British bourgeois state might be one of the oldest in the world, but it is now doomed to circling the plug hole of history, shall we say. And so I will conclude on this point that this new and emergent multipolar world is a new stage of the class struggle, both nationally and internationally, that we are entering into. It is one fraught with dangers, fraught with new avenues of struggle opening up, and of course new repressions coming from the ruling class. But it is one that presents us with the opportunity of finally putting the nails in the coffin of British and European imperialism once and for all. And for all those reasons, I and many others in Britain embrace this new opportunity, and I'm glad to see that many others across the imperialist countries are coming to this level of consciousness and awareness and pushing for a working class revolution in their countries, because that is the only way forward. And I'll conclude my comments there, comrades.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was a really great presentation, very informative and very interesting. Did you want to stick around for maybe like 5 minutes for some question and answer? What do you think?
Yeah, certainly. Go ahead if there's any questions.
So if anyone has any questions or comments or anything?
I mean, I would like to hear more about where he sees the City of London in the current state of things, where it sits with the other financial centers, the Wall Streets, the Frankfurts. What role does the city specifically play?
It's like what you heard, yeah?
Yeah, the role of the City of London. I would say that the role of the City of London is still tremendously important. It absolutely dominates British capitalism. It is the principal engine of profits in the British economy. It has lost its position recently to Paris in terms of being the leading European financial center. But it's not only important in global terms, but also this is where all the personnel from our ruling class emerge from. If you look into the backgrounds of a lot of the characters in the intelligence business and in politics, like our current Prime Minister, for instance, Rishi Sunak, this is a man who's a pure product of the City of London. And the City of London is, of course, British imperialism in concentrated form, in the form of the square mile. So its importance can't be underestimated. But of course, as I said in the presentation, it relies increasingly upon the brute force that is able to be exercised by the United States to maintain that position. Because the other side of it is, of course, the idea that Britain is a safe place to put your money through. One side effect of the Russian special military operation and the attempt to deny Russian oil ships insurance, for instance, is that the position of Lloyd's, the great insurance giant, and the London insurance market has been called into question. Because suddenly, if you're going to be cut off from being able to insure your ships if the West takes against you, then you might want to develop an alternative system. And so what we'll see is that the countries outside of the Western Bloc that used to use the financial services of the City of London, as it shows itself to be more and more a weapon that can be used against them, they will start to drift away from it and they will start to develop their own systems. And that will, of course, drain the power away from certain elements within the City of London. But at the moment, it's still important. It still dominates the British economy and, of course, British ruling class politics as well. But I think that we're starting to see its power drain, and everybody should welcome that.
Cool. We have time for another question before we move on. Yeah.
I have one regarding Palestine. I'm just curious as what you're seeing in Britain as far as like news coverage and also, normal people's attitudes regarding the situation.
Well, in terms of news coverage in the bourgeois press, it is hysterically pro-Israel. I mean, I don't think it's quite at the same level of hysteria that you get in the United States, but it's close. And that reflects, of course, what I was saying in the discussion, which I was just outlining to you, which is that Israel is a British ruling class project, and they remain attached to it. And they also know that Israel acts in their interests in the Middle East. So that explains the hysterical way in which this has been treated. But in terms of the audience beyond the bourgeoisie and the reactionary petty bourgeois, you see and have always seen that the British working class is much more skeptical of the relationship with Israel. You see large-scale demonstrations are called against Israeli actions. There was one just yesterday in Manchester that was called with 24 hours notice that had 1,000 people turn out to it. The slogans were quite direct and quite bold in favor of supporting the Palestinian right to armed resistance. And of course, it attracted the attention of our beloved Greater Manchester Police Force, who turned up to try and harass people. But outside of the tiny bubbles of the ruling class and some of the petty bourgeois existing, the view taken on Israel is a lot more skeptical, to say the least, even though debate over this is simply not allowed within the bourgeois public sphere. The wider working class are much more rightly skeptical of the role that the British government plays in the Middle East and the attachment that the British government has to Israel.
All right, Alex, thanks a lot. We're going to move on to our next speaker now. Again, how about another round of applause for Alex?
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Alex. Is Jeff already on the line?
Yeah, I'm telling him to join now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for our next speaker, according to the program, we've got Jeff Monson calling in from Russia. I've got a long list of his accomplishments here to introduce him. He's a black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's an MMA European champion, 6-time Jiu-Jitsu world champion. He is a former U.S. citizen. He actually revoked his U.S. citizenship. Now he's only Russian. And he's a member of the Bashkortostan Duma in Russia, so he's a Russian deputy. He's a self-described libertarian communist and a political activist. So we're going to get him on the line now, and he's going to have a lot of interesting stuff to say. Like I mentioned earlier, we collaborated together on the documentary we did on the Donbass conflict before the military operation began. So,
So,
We'll give
him a minute.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, just let me know when he's almost with that.
All right. Maybe we can just take a little break, yeah? As we wait for Jeff, since we did just go through a pretty long speech. So yeah, everyone enjoy chocolates, grapes, and everything. Get some coffee, tea.
What's his name?
Jeff Monson.
No, sorry, that's the last speaker.
Oh, Alexander McKay.
So good.
Yeah,
Really
he's like very smart.
YouTube channel is amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. He used to have a radio thing called Red Star Radio also. Yeah.
He still does a podcast version of that,
Oh,
but it's
okay.
called Mark Singer's Planet Institute.
Yeah, I think he just rebranded everything to be Mark Singer.
I listen to him on Spotify.
Yeah, I'm really lucky to have gotten in contact with him. Like he mentioned, when I was in Georgia when those riots were going on. That was the first time we sat together.
Cool.
Yeah, he's got a really cool show to say.
Hopefully I can
that really was crazy actually in Georgia. I really saw the true face of U.S.-backed color revolution there, dude. They are rabid.
So much.
They are
They've
crazy.
spent so much. They better be. They better be.
I spoke Russian a little bit there because my cameramen were Russian, and like people were like giving me looks. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna speak in English. And when I did interviews with people, I asked for an interview. They all asked like who I was. I was like, oh, I'm an American journalist. It's not a lie. But so that they're like, oh, we hate Russia. Russia's the devil. They were like rabid. They were like rabid nationalists.
On a per capita
there.
basis, that has to be the highest paid color rev on at this point. They've
Oh
done
yeah.
tiny little place,
so much money.
Yeah, dude, because the color revolution operation goes all the way back to like the 90s, like the Rose Revolution, where they installed Saakashvili. That was like they grew thousands of NGOs throughout the country to make that happen, and now he's in jail.
About a year ago, I was at a May Day event, May Day 2022, and we ran into we had a Donetsk Republic flag, and we ran into some like Euro-mated veterans, and I was worried we were gonna have to find our way out of there.
Yeah.
All right,
Get crazy.
just give us a few minutes.
There
and
he
we'll
is.
get set up.
Sideways.
You're also sideways, so if you can flip your camera maybe?
Yeah,
Is this better?
Yeah, that's
That's
better.
it.
Awesome.
Hey Jeff, good to hear from you.
All right, we'll get you set up just a minute.
Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. No, pop it here, okay? Pop right here. We'll pop it do this show, and then pop it wash your keys, and then I'll lay down with you. Okay?
Wonderful.
Jeff also speaks Russian. Fluent Russian also.
That's nice.
Are we good?
We're good whenever.
Yeah, Jeff, just another 2 minutes. We'll let people drink some tea and coffee and stuff, and then I'll give you the cue.
Okay. Oh, you want strawberry shake?
Put the heat on because it was off. Yeah, it was like super fun. Yeah.
I went in the backyard to make a phone call. The guy yelled, what? He said, you gotta be in the back, you gotta be in the front. I'm like, okay, yeah, good. No, Germany.
No, Germany. Yeah, no, Germany.
I feel like maybe I should bring it more up. What do you think?
It's good now, it's better now.
Yeah, it feels much better. It's fine. I can take my jacket off.
People are so cold, I can bring it up.
I guess we'll begin now.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I guess we'll move on to Jeff Monson now. So we'll bring him up on video chat. Yeah, Jeff, I
Give me
introduced.
30 seconds.
Yeah, Jeff, I introduced you and everything. According to what you said. So. Can you hear me, Jeff?
I'm making you strawberry shake.
Okay. Do you need a second, Jeff?
Why? I need 20 seconds.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
That's the sight.
We don't have any strawberry
That's the
shakes.
sight of victory.
We don't have any strawberries. We don't have any strawberries. We use them all up for the show. Have fun. Don't touch it. Oh, sorry. Baby, you don't check your film. The puppy be here for.
All right, Jeff, you ready?
Okay. Next.
All right,
Yep.
cool. The floor is yours. Take it away. We're ready, Jeff.
So you want just tell my story, like just talk?
Yeah. Like you've got an hour, and we can have some time for Q&A at the end. Talk about we're talking about the emergence of the multipolar world. Talk about I guess your experience in Russia with that. You could talk a bit about our documentary. What's it like being a Russian deputy and everything.
Okay. Like you want me to put like bring in like comedy, like the like social aspects and stuff, yeah?
Yeah, that's fine. Whatever you want.
Okay.
All right. So go ahead.
Okay. Hey guys, I'm Jeff Monson. I'm currently in Ufa, Russia, which is about 2 hours southeast of Moscow by flight. And I've lived here 3 years, and I've lived a total of 7 years in Russia. I'm American born and lived in America my whole life, except for a couple years in England. But
Now I've lived in Russia 7 years, and it's been a quite an experience. I got my first taste of Russia when I was in 2011. I fought. So I'm a fighter. I'm a fighter, and I fought Fedor Emelianenko in a big fight with Vladimir Putin came and a lot of the government members of the Duma, and I really got my ass kicked in this fight. And but I went the distance. I broke my leg, and the next day Putin, like, he called me, and he was calling on the phone. Actually, in the hotel, I started feeling sorry for myself because I had a broken leg. I couldn't move. I lost this fight. I thought I was going to win, and they kept calling up, and they finally, one of my corners answered the phone and said, "Their guy, this is like security, like answer the phone." And he's like, he doesn't want to talk. Hangs up. And then finally, people came to the door, and they opened the door and said, "No, it's national security. Like, pick up the phone." So the caller was actually Mr. Putin, and told me like, "Oh, you showed the Russian spirit, and you have, showed the qualities of being like a Russian like soul kind of thing." And so that like started this loss, which was obviously terrible for me. Started like a chain of good events. Just kind of the right place at the right time. And then kind of ironically in the UFC, this was a terrible time to be leaving the UFC and a good time to be coming to the UFC. Because I had just fought for the UFC title a few months earlier, and for the UFC title, the championship. And now, these guys were making several $1 million to be at that level, to be the highest level, make that money. I fought for the UFC title. I took home $13,000 for fighting for the title. So that was a misfortune, but it was perfect timing for my time in Russia. And after I started doing some fights, when some fights, had did some seminars, and ever since I was a kid, I had a fascination with Russia, and like, I liked history a lot, and I read about the the October Revolution and this, and obviously I became interested in politics long before I came to Russia. Being from Seattle and having a lot of leftist people, the IWW, and people that were like against the war and this, and it really was a great opportunity, to come to a place that I always wanted to be. I dreamt about, being in Red Square and seeing Lenin's memorial and all this stuff. It was like kind of a dream come true. But then, I actually got to meet the people that were, part of it. Actually, the day before I fought Fedor, I did a free seminar for some anarchists who had heard that I was coming to fight and got a hold of me. And so I did that seminar. I was actually late for the press conference. I actually missed the press conference, so they're quite angry with me. But it was like a really good experience. I mean, I met like 40 like anarchists from Russia, and that was like kind of a dream come true. It's like where, in my opinion, it all started. It definitely the first social revolution in the world happened here. So. Sorry, my dog. And for me, it was just like a dream. But so anyway, so I fought, and I got to come to Russia a lot, and working, where I got to work for RT for a year and a half, and we're downwards now, and then. It was kind of a dream, just like this is the place where I started, and working with people that are actually, from kind of where it started from. So I was very, very excited about that. And now, at this point, I'm living here. I'll get into why I moved here in a minute, but as a background, I grew up like really middle class. My mom was a nurse. My dad worked at a penitentiary. And I was like, I always had what I wanted. I never went without. And I supported America. I didn't know anything about, I liked history, but I didn't know anything about the rest of the world, like as far as the current events and stuff like that. Until my junior year of college, and we had a professor for a social psychology class, and he came in, and he was from India, and he talked about how resources that were used for individual therapy and could be used for group therapy, how it'd be cheaper, more effective. He talked about how monies that would be sent to war, all of the arm of the United States military was so big, and how people would be cut out. He talked about the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve is a bank, a private bank. I never knew that stuff, and most Americans still actually don't. A private bank that we have to pay interest on, and like the money's borrowed, and it just opened my eyes to what was actually reality. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever thought about any of this. I didn't like people being mistreated, or obviously poor or something like that. I didn't like this inequality, but I didn't know what I could do about it. And I definitely didn't think the United States was a perpetrator. I thought the United States was, savior. You always saw this. Oh, the United States gives aid to Guam or Guatemala or Somalia or something like this. But I didn't realize all the strings attached to it and stuff like that. So it was an eye opener anyway, this experience. And so I started, this is before the internet. So I started, checking out books on communism, about, more about the revolution and the October Revolution in Russia and different movements around the world. And it became interesting, consuming really. And so I was like, I was a psychology major, and I almost wanted to change to political science, but at that point it was going to be 2 more years of school, and I didn't have the money for it. But anyway, after this, I became a psychologist, got my master's and doctorate degree in psychology, worked with people for a long time, and I wrestled in college and tried to be a All-American, and I was like 1 match short, and then I tried to make the USA competitive team, not necessarily the Olympic team, but the top six athletes in each weight class get a per diem every month and a salary to live, to train, and man, I finished 8th 3 different times, so I was 1 match away 3 different times. And it was pretty heartbreaking. But I was at this point, I was married, had 2 children, I'm working full time in a psychology clinic, and then later a mental health hospital ward. So there was just no time to dedicate myself. I was after work, after coming home to eat dinner, I spend time with kids. I would go to the gym and meet up with some high school guys, wrestlers or something like this. And I compete, try to make the team at the U.S. Championship every year. It was I did well, but not well enough. And then, MMA, we had some MMA champions from my area in Seattle, which was just by luck. I trained with them, and then I went to Abu Dhabi, where the World Championship of Jiu-Jitsu is held every year. And first time I'd ever been out of the U.S. before, and I just came out of nowhere and won this championship, this World Championship. And then my whole life changed. And I had to decide to, whether to continue being a psychologist or use this opportunity to be, fight jiu-jitsu and do MMA fights. And I'd already done a bunch of MMA fights, which I was successful at in Seattle. So I thought, I can always be a psychologist. I'm young, 20 years old. I can always go back to be a psychologist, but I can't go back to be, sports. So I ended up moving to Florida, took my wife and kids with me, and became a fighter. And then that just my whole, that changed the course of my life. So this one fight or this one tournament, and after that, so that I talk about my experience in college, which got me studying about and learning about like socialism, anarchism, especially. At this point, I consider myself an anarchist. You know, I was going to IWW meetings in Seattle, meeting up with a bunch of leftist people in like Olympia and Seattle, in this area, and become involved in political movements. You know, protesting the war in Iraq and this, and you know, at one point, I didn't know, you know, in Florida there was definitely, it was an eye opener, because it was very poor in some areas, but very affluent in other areas, and it was very the affluent areas were very right wing, extremist right wing. I remember during the like the Gulf War, or there were, you know, people literally dressed in like Boca Raton, which is a very plush area, dressed like in mock Arab outfits with, you know, wrapped around the head, and this, like, with signs, like they painted their faces. I mean, this is like, talk about blackface. I mean, they painted their faces like dark, and were running around and acting, you know, with signs like saying, "Oh, if you support, you know, us, you're like a communist, or you're a terrorist," or something like that. So I mean, just damn, like I was never like so angry, but anyway, it's very new experience being in Florida. And during this time, I joined. Ironically, it's called American Top Team, which I'm so part of. But there, it was all Brazilians. In fact, I was only out of probably 25 guys, there was only two Americans. All the rest were Brazilians. And I think like one guy from Venezuela. So anyway, yeah. So I was fighting, and my other experience, my other like life experience that as far as social, like becoming more involved with socialism, is I went to Rio for a fight, and so I'm fighting in Rio, and actually fighting in Rio de Janeiro is illegal, because it was like a 2-hour drive from Rio, in kind of the mountains. I mean, like the most beautiful country, beautiful scenery I've ever seen in my life. You know, it's warm, it's beautiful, there's trees, it's the ocean wind, it's just good, it's not polluted. So I went into this fight, and I won the fight. I felt good about myself. So we drove back that night, and I was staying like in a probably 4-star hotel. So there's like a buffet, 24-hour buffet. So I had one day, this last night before I have to leave back to Miami the next day, and I'm walking on the beach, so with just no shirt on, flip flops and shorts, feeling like really happy with myself. I just won. I don't remember how it was a pretty good payday, so I'm feeling pretty good. And walking on the beach, and then, you know, it started to get late, and I'm hungry, so like, oh, I'm gonna go eat. It's like 3 a.m, and I'm walking back to the hotel, and I get maybe like 50 meters from the hotel, and I notice some people on a mat, like a cardboard, you know, box that had been broken down to make like a mat, and they were close to the hotel, but like 20 meters from the hotel. So I kept walking, and I saw that it was a woman. A woman, and then a child with long hair that was a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and then a child like 1-year-old child, boy. And the mother said something to the daughter, the 7-year-old, 8-year-old, and then the daughter pushed me as I was walking to this hotel. So I kind of slowed down, and she came up to me and asked for a Rio, which at the time that it was probably like 33, 32 American cents. And I couldn't be more shocked, because this was a Sunday night, and so I was thinking, you know, this was like October, something like this. So I'm thinking, this kid should be going to school tomorrow. Obviously can't. It's 3 a.m, and she's sleeping on a mat outside, like literally outside on a cardboard box, with her mom and her 1-year-old brother. And I was thinking, holy shit! I'm walking back to a 4-star hotel. I'm about to have a buffet, all I can eat, And what am I contributing to the world? I entertain people with fighting. I'm an entertainer. That's my contribution. And I'm getting big money. I mean, probably more money than probably this lady's ever seen in her life or ever would see. And I'm getting one for one 15-minute fight. And I just went to the hotel room and cried. I just cried for a long time. And I just thought, what does this world come to? And but I'm a part of it. It's not just this world is so awful and terrible and so unfair. It's I'm part of this. I'm contributed. Hey, baby, I'm doing the interview screen. You're gonna have to wait, okay? You gotta wait. You gotta be patient. You gotta give me a few minutes, okay? Sorry. And I thought I'm part of this system, and I have to do something about it. And when I came to Russia, and I fought Fedor, and then just everything happened. I don't know if it could have happened being written in a better script for me for losing a fight. I thought, oh my God, I lost this fight, but it actually opened up my whole life in Russia, because I didn't give up. I thought who called me, and then after the fight, Fedor, who's like a god here, literally, for a long time after I fought Fedor for a year, people were not oh, you're Jeff Munson, you're you're the guy who fought Fedor. You're the guy who actually met him and fought him. Wow, you're that guy. That's how big of an icon he is. So, anyway, he came into my dressing. He's a nice guy. He came into my dressing room and he did a photo with me. He put his arm around me, hugged me, and I'm laying down. My leg's broken, my face is smashed, but he hugging me. And this is on the front page of the Moscow Times and all of the internet and stuff. So the next day, all of Russia saw it's not just a fighter, but it's a guy from USA that Fedor likes and Fedor gives his thumbs up to. So this opened up a bunch of doors. And then I came back. Oh, your snake, nice. I came back. Then I was able to win some fights and had some seminars. I did some political stuff, and it just snowballed. Then I was on the Dancing with Stars. I was on the Late Show with but they'll have one late show. I was on the show, and it just I was on a bunch of television shows for children and a cooking show and this, so it became bigger than life kind of thing just by being at the right place at the right time, really. And and then during the interviews, I obviously said nice things about Russia, supporting Russia and this. So that it was. I mean, if I was a Russian guy, a Russian fighter with the same record, the same credentials, everything the same, none of this would be like this. The fact is, I'm from America, and of course, Russians have a complex, kind of inferiority complex, because they think everybody is against them and doesn't appreciate them. And especially now with this Ukraine conflict, that's tripled. But if an American came from America, lived in America, and had all the success and joys of being an American, liked living in America, came to Russia and says, I like Russia, I like the Russian people, and I support the people here, and I like coming here and all that. I mean, that's what it was, more than being a fighter. It was someone, and then being on the shows and stuff. So I became quite famous. But really, it was just a bunch of fun. It was one of those things where I look at someone I make fun of on TV. That's they're just like a Kardashian. They're famous for being famous, but it's they never did anything like that. And it's I did things, but not to this level to being like this. So like I said, if I was just a regular fighter or something like that from Russia, it wouldn't have happened like this. So it's given me a dream, really, because it gave me the opportunities to do things I normally wouldn't be able to do that I couldn't do in the United States. So back in the United States, this is during the United States occupation and whatever, Afghanistan, Iraq, and after the war, the war went on for years and years. And me and some of my leftist friends went to downtown Olympia, the state capital. We protested. Some of them got arrested. Because the reason why Olympia is so important is that this is it's a port, it's Olympia Port, and this is where it's pretty close. It's maybe like 30 minutes from Fort Lewis, the military base there, the Army base, and maybe an hour and some from McCord Air Force Base, and it's also close to a bunch of smaller military installations. So when they want to send soldiers, tanks, weapons, cannons, all this stuff to Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere in the world, from these bases, it goes through Olympia. And so it's really crazy because in the middle of the day, like the police will come through, the army people will come through, they'll put up like flashing lights, and the city just shuts down. The main streets just shut down or blocked, and here come, thousands of soldiers. Here come a bunch of tanks. Here come a bunch of like equipment. For it takes anywhere from an hour and a half to longer, 2 hours, 3 hours. Get all this stuff through, get to the port, and so at one of these, we had heard that they were coming because we got a call that they were like on the down I-5 corridor, that there was a bunch of military equipment, so we suspected they were coming to the port. So we went and blockaded the entrance to the port, like hand in hand, holding, and they just went and read some, like said, hey, if you resist, we're gonna arrest you. Either no comment or whatever, and they just picked off each person at the end, personally at them, until it was me and one other young guy holding hands. And the guy came up to me, he goes, "Look, Jeff, I know who you are, but we're going to arrest you." And I said, "I'm not going to let you take me. Well, I'm not going to fight you, but I'm not going to punch you. I'm not going to hurt you or try to, but I'm going to resist. I'm not going to let you I'm not going to walk away and let you put me in a canyon and take me to the jail." He said, "Okay, we're just going to taser you. Like, it's your choice as you do." And I said, look at, there's probably 200 people watching, and many of these people have cell phones, like taking like photos, taking videos. So you come up to me and talk to me, and then I say I'm not going to go, and you come up and just tase me. I fall down and you drag me away. How's that going to look? It's going to be on the news tonight. And so he went away, talked to his like superior, talk whatever, and then up like driving around us. Because we're just two guys in the middle. So I just drove around us, and we accomplished nothing at all. So we later on, we went. We did some other protests. I was working at this time. I was working really a lot with the IWW, and obviously it was frustrating because it didn't seem like we were getting much done, and it was probably true. We weren't getting much done, and right, properly much. And there's some things going on. There were people at this time. There was a lot of anti-capitalist movement there too. A lot of banks were being broken into, not for stealing stuff, but like just the windows smashed, and or spray paint and stuff like that. So like the police were becoming more aggressive and violent dealing with protests and demonstrators and this. So there was like less tolerance for any kind of protest, even peaceful protests. And at one point, ESPN, the magazine, because I was going to fight for the title. I was going to fight Tim Sylvia for the title. And so they came and interviewed me and said, "Hey, you're fighting Tim Sylvia for the title. We want to send a photographer and a journalist down and spend like 2 days with you, and or 2.5 days with you." I said, "Yeah, it's okay." So he came down and they stayed at a hotel, and they just were with me all day until the evening, And I go home and, they're with me in my car, they're with me like all day to see what I do. And so they got to see what I do. At this time when, we went to IWW meeting, they went to, we had a protest, like trying to stop unsuccessfully stop some more like soldiers and whatever go. And I do want to say we had a campaign where we raised probably 45,000 signatures from residents of Olympia saying we do not want you sending troops and stuff to the middle of our city where our children or whatever watch this, you shut down a city so you can send troops and to war like that and whatever. And I'm like, this is like unacceptable, And then we had so many signatures. They didn't even look at it. It wasn't even we didn't even get a response. Not even like, okay, we took your signatures into account, but we're still gonna continue, or we're still gonna do our policy. And they didn't even know. I think they just like whatever, like they just tossed it in the garbage or whatever. But anyway, we got no response. So this didn't sit very well with a bunch of us. So anyway, when ESPN came down, we had planned to go to the state capitol and do a protest. And the protest was going to be when the legislators came out of were adjourned from their meeting. It would be like about 4:00 on this like Thursday afternoon, and this was like November, so it got dark, maybe like 4:30. So my plan was to meet my friend, and we're gonna spray paint the Capitol building. And so about the spray paint, we got everything. We didn't wear masks. We didn't wear disguises. We didn't do nothing. We just went down there. And on our way down there, my friend, it was just me and my friend, at this point, only two of us, and my friend got actually arrested, like on the way for an outstanding warrant, and I can't remember for what, but I'm not sure if it had to do with demonstrations or what, but he got like picked off. And so I have this photographer, this journalist with me, and I tell them, I go, look, I'm still going to do it, but there's a good chance I'm going to get arrested for spray painting because I'm doing it in not broad daylight, but I'm doing it, I'm not doing it at night. I'm not doing it, secret. I mean, people are walking out of the Capitol building, and they said, no, we'll go with you. And I said, okay, but it's your risk. I can't be responsible. And I said, oh, okay, we'll go. So I went there, and it was about, I don't know, 4:45, something like this, and they were going to come out at 5. So I spray painted like no war. I painted the anarchy side. I painted the peace sign. I say no poverty. I did big red letters, like big on the state capitol, and then I left. And so noticed that people saw me, but they also saw the photographer and the journalist with me, like filming me do it. So I think they saved me at the time because these people that watched this were like, no, it's just like some kind of, they're doing this for some show or something. Like, I don't know, but they thought it was legit because I was being filmed doing it. So anyway, nothing happened. Nothing like I didn't call, I didn't get arrested, nothing. I just drove home. Anyway, they printed the story in January. It was like 3 months later. They printed the story, and the day I was actually in North Carolina, and the day after the story came out, I saw the front of Yahoo News on my phone. It said $50,000 warrant for Jeff Munson or whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh! So my wife was at home with my 2 kids, and this was a Friday, and I wasn't going to be coming home till Monday, and the police came to the house. They had 10 or 15 people, the same SWAT team, had around the house, from the windows, in the woods, knocking on the door, coming in with guns and stuff. and my wife's like shocked, like, oh my gosh, oh my God. So she called me and said, Jeff, there's a SWAT team here, like looking for yourself. Well, actually, I talked to the captain. I said, look, I'm not coming home, so I'm coming home on Monday. I'm not running away from you. I didn't do this in disguise to begin with. I knew at some point there would be some consequences, so I'll be home on Monday. Just don't come back to my house. Please don't scare me through the courts. Don't scare my wife. I'm coming back Monday on a flight. I didn't tell them where it was because I want to be them waiting at the airport, but I said I'll be back Monday upon and I'll turn myself in. So we made a deal. So they upheld the deal, but unfortunately, I got arrested because of this warrant. It was like a nationwide. I ended up getting arrested in North Carolina, and I spent 5 days in jail, North Carolina. And my boss, the owner of the
Jeff, you're covering the mic with your hand.
Actually, he bailed me out of jail. No, you can go to the room and close the door. Sorry about that. I got my wife is in a different city and I'm home with 2 kids and grandma. So, but anyway, yeah. So I got this anyway. But and then I ended up during this also before I went in because my son was in high school and the recruiters were coming to my son's high school and recruiting these 18-year-old kids, these seniors, when they graduate and trying to get them to join them. All right, I mean, this is right in the middle of war. They're going to be sent straight to Iraq, straight to Afghanistan, straight in the middle of conflict. The 18-year-old kids, their whole life ahead of them, going to be killed or maimed or put at serious risk. And also killing other people at 18 years old, just coming out of high school. And to me, this was an atrocity. And I went and talked to one of the recruiters at the recruiting center, and he basically dismissed me. He's like, get the hell out of here. Like, who are you? Like, this is the U.S. Army. He's like, who are you to, whatever. So I come out, and this time I didn't come back overnight, but I just smashed this place. I got broke in, like spray painted, and then they had a vehicle outside too, like with the Army thing on it, and I popped all the tires with a knife, and I slashed the tires, and I got a lot of damage, and I was like, how I justified not only because they were doing wrong, but I thought, you know what? If they're out of commission for 2 days, 3 days, maybe that's one less person or 5 less people that they're able to recruit that are going to go to Iraq or whatever. And these are like 5 people I'm saving from getting, or even one person saved from, getting put in this situation. So I felt absolutely nice about this. So nice that I did it again at a different recruiting station a couple of days later. And so anyway, they did have this. I didn't disguise myself or anything. But anyway, when all this came out with the spray paint and stuff, then these other 2 charges came out too. They put the videos together. They said, that all made sense to them. Like, oh, it's the same guy. So anyway, I had three felony charges, and so anyway, my lawyer did a deal where I admitted I did it, which obviously they had me anyway, and I served 3 months in jail and paid. Well, I was supposed to pay like a $28,000 fine for the spray painting and the other stuff to pay back, the damage I'd done. But I was paying like $100 a month for a couple of years, and then when I started coming to Russia, I'm like, I'm never going back to live in the U.S. anyway, so I'm not going to pay this, and I just anyway, so I'm not paying it. But yeah. Honestly, the interest was more than I was paying $100 a month. The interest was more than that. It was getting higher and higher every month. I'm like, I don't think I'm paying this. But, anyway, so this just gave me a great opportunity. I had another excuse for like when I came to Russia because, you know, I burned a lot of bridges in the U.S. as far as employment and this, you know, being a felon, and also during this time during the war, like I just didn't pay taxes. Like I just didn't pay any taxes for 8 years, and the first year I actually wrote. And I found out it's not illegal not to pay the taxes. I didn't know this. It's illegal not to file. You can file. So the first year I actually filed, but I filed, and I didn't know this was okay to do, but I filed and said, I'm not paying taxes because there's a war, and I'm not being like held responsible for contributing to this war, because that's what you use the money for. I did get a response, so I'm like, oh, cool. And so for the next 7 years, but I didn't file the next 7 years at all. I had nothing. I didn't even send a letter saying I'm not paying. So at some point, I was at home with my wife, and the IRS literally showed at my door, like the IRS man, and then an armed like agent, and said, we got to talk. And so they they like basically confiscated my assets from my bank, and then took money from my wife's like salary and stuff like that, and then we're taking money wherever they could get. They took some items and sold and this and that. So he said, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail. And I didn't want to go to jail. And this time it was going to be not 3 months in jail, but like years in jail. And I thought it's not worth like losing my time away from like living. So anyway, this happened. So at this point, when I was in Russia, like going to Russia, I thought, man, why can't I? Maybe I can live in Russia. Why not just live in? I ended up getting because of the popularity, I was able to get a passport, a Russian passport. Vladimir Putin gave me a Russian passport as a dual citizen, and this like opened up more avenues. And it was just I ended up working with as a side note, I worked with the Communist Party for probably 2 years, and not a good experience. It was, like I said, it was my dream. I had a fascination with Russia when I was younger. I liked history. I liked, read about the October Revolution and this. And then when I actually learned about socialism, learned about communism, and I was like, wow, this is not like the actual Communist Party I'm like working with. They gave me like some official title as foreign, like, athlete correspondent, something. I forgot what it was, like some kind of official thing, non-salaried, whatever. And I thought, oh, this is like, oh my gosh, I'm actually working with the Communist Party. But for 2 years, man, I met Ziganov a bunch of times, like taking pictures with Ziganov, meeting Ziganov at cheese and wine dinners, meeting Ziganov here, meeting Ziganov, helping with their elections, like everything. And I thought, I know they're using me. I know they're like, I'm just like a puppet in a way, but I want something too. So I'll just play along. I'll just, I want to work with them because I want them to open free children's sports schools for me in different cities. And they kept promising and promising. Obviously they have huge money for this. They have the means to do this. And they just kept promising, but not doing, promising, not doing. And then finally said, okay, we'll open one in Moscow first, and then we'll go from there. I'm like, okay, well, one is better than none to start with. It'll do well, and they'll see how successful it is. And they'll see that it's good because, in the news, like Jeff Munson, with the help of the Communist Party, opens free children's school for kids for sport. I go, do you understand how good this would look for you? How good of a news you couldn't pay for this kind of media coverage. You know what I mean? Like it's the best for your party. But they just dragged, and I at the last cheese and wine dinner, it was like a photo. They had like photographs of Che Guevara, during the Cuban Revolution, and Fidel Castro, and like old photos of Stalin, all this like cool stuff. and at this, I said, look, we got to meet tomorrow and set up the plan for the school. And they said, okay, great. So we did all the photos, all the stuff. The next day, they just go, oh, we can't make it. And I said, I thought. So I called Channel 1 and I said, hey, I want to do an interview. And they're like, okay, when, today? And I said, okay. And I came and I said, look, I love socialism. I love the history of the USSR and the fact that this is the first social revolution and there's still communism here. You can see it every day in the people on the streets, how they help each other, how they care for each other. And this is like one of the things, this is why I love Russia right now. I'm in Ufa in the center. I was out with my daughter a little bit ago, and when she falls down, somebody's there picking her up. If people are like helpful and caring about each other, and there's this, I'm sure, and a lot of people, the older people who lived under the communism and now say, man, we sure miss how it was in communism. But I can just imagine how nice it was under communism. If I think this is so nice now, I can't imagine how, what society was like, just like how much solidarity and like a communal respect for each other society had back then. So I love this about Russia. But anyway, I did the interview and I said, man, there's communism in Russia all over the place. I see it, I feel it. I see it every day and how people respect and treat each other. But I said, in the main Communist Party in Moscow, in the State Duma, there are no communists. And so the Communist Party did not like this, so we broke ties. And then I ended up moving to Krasnogorsk, working with the mayor there, and he had me run to be a deputy, run for the election. So I became a deputy in a city outside Moscow called Krasnogorsk. I was there for 2 years. We started a litter campaign and a recycling campaign where there was absolutely no recycling in this whole city. And when we left, every apartment building and every complex and every business had recycling like a recycling place, and it was taking a recycling center, and it was hooked up to the main. It was like all driven to Moscow to the recycling center. So this was good. And we also opened a free school for children and adults, a sports school for to training kids and stuff like that. So that was good. I was really happy with this. But the thing is, it's like, when you're having these dreams of of socialism and bring communism and working with this, working in a small city outside of Moscow and setting up a recycling campaign and opening one school is not really your lifelong dream. So anyway, just the mayor is from this area called Bashkortostan, where I'm in now, and Ufa is the main city here. And so he was called to be the governor. Putin called him and said, hey, we have an opening. I want you to be the governor of Bashkortostan. So where you're from, this is a dream for you. So this is the second largest district in all of Russia by land area. And so he came here, and then after a few months, he invited me here to open children's schools here. So there's a lot more people here, a lot bigger area, a lot more opportunities. So we've opened 27 free sports schools for kids here. We also have connections with the Detsky Dome, the orphanage here. We also have 2 schools for the deaf that we work with them. So, and during this time, I was able to go to, I've been going to, we'll talk later about this, but Donetsk and Lugansk, and we opened a school in Donetsk as well, free sports school for kids, grappling sports school, Bujutsu. So that was like a big accomplishment of like something we're happy with. And so, but recently, I became a deputy. I was elected to the deputy, and so now we have like a bunch of huge projects. And I when I talked to Roddy, or I talked to the governor, Roddy Graf, I said, man, I would like to be a deputy, but if you're wanting me to do this is what I want to do. I want to open a center for, because I did this in America. I didn't open it, but I worked at it. A center for, a help center for people with like problems with drugs and alcohol, or maybe they lost their identification. Here, if you don't have a passport, the national passport, you can't get a job, you can't get on a bus. In some instances, you definitely can't. You can't get into some buildings. I mean, you're stuck. Maybe they need a passport. Maybe they need to look for a job. Maybe they need to go to the doctor and like don't have enough money or whatever to see a doctor, or afraid or something like this. So we have a nurse that's going to come 2 times a month for a couple hours and see people that come here too, and like maybe just a cup of coffee, maybe just to talk, find a job, something. Whatever the problem, we try to find the resource for these people to get connected with somebody who can help them if we can't help them directly with whatever issue they have. So this was important to open this center. So this center process being open. We also asked for to open a homeless shelter. You know, I was shocked by the statistic. Like 470 people died in Ufa, just the city of 1.3 million people. You know, like over 1,300 people died in Ufa last winter from cold-related illnesses, like being sick from not being homeless, or not having like proper food, not being able to access to medicine because they live on the streets, whatever it was. Anyway, like 1,300, this is a huge number of people, and especially when you very rarely see people sleeping, like never. I'll go as far as saying, I've never seen people sleeping outside on the street. So I'm like, where do they stay? Oh yeah, very good, sweet. I when I'm done, I can do it. Okay, so don't do that. Nobody doesn't like that, though. Just scared. Okay. And so we're working. We want to open this. So that thing, and we want to open more schools. We want to open more schools. So we have 100 free schools because that schools are so big, and there's villages, you know, hours away, being spread out all over this huge, vast area. They don't have any sports at all. So our goal is to open 100 sports schools free. Open the help center. Open the homeless shelter with food, and then also twice a month we want to hold dances in Ufa, in this big sports complex, for kids 12 to 18 to come and like dance and like, you know, there's a DJ that's aware of it. We've already got a hold of a DJ that's willing to do this for free. We play, you know, the latest music, and you know, have punch and cookies and whatever like that. You know, in a safe place, be able to socialize with their friends. So we think this is going to be a big hit. So it's just these little things that isn't bringing communism, isn't bringing socialism back to Russia, but it is these things that have its roots in socialism that we think is so important to bring to the community, because when you make a computer society healthier by even the littlest bit, you're making it better, safer, healthier for everybody within the community. So, you know, it's like the domino effect. When one thing is better, then that affects everything else. So, this is our goal. This is our, you know, dream to do this. But we have the backing of the governor. So, yeah, but you got to turn that music off soon.
Hey Jeff, we have to, Jeff.
So this is our goal now.
Jeff. We have to.
And then in 3 years, I would like to be.
Jeff, we have to.
I can be part. I'm eligible to run for the state Duma. So that's my goal is to run for the state Duma, where now I can affect, you know, a few million people, but in the state Duma, with the right, you know, being you can affect 160 million people, you know, with policies and this. So, and I found a lot of people I'm working with that maybe not identify as communists. There's a few that actually do, but they definitely carry the tradition of the the social and communist attributes from the USSR, and definitely have inherited that from their parents. You probably inherited that from their parents. So it's definitely still part of society, even if it isn't like official. And so this is like, for me, this is just the absolute dream. You know, I had my time as a fighter. You know, I had my time fighting, famous, had money. I was in the United States with a nice house, a nice car, and I had definitely more money. And now I have, I don't have a car, I don't own a house or anything like that. I definitely have some money, but I'm much, much happier because I have the opportunity to help other people. Now, a lot of people have helped me. I could have asked for a better life as far as being able to travel, meet different people, see different situations, see different cultures, meet people who are wanting to help other people and giving me inspiration. So, given all of this, given the fact I'm in Russia and I was given citizenship here, I was able to have the opportunity to live here and make a life here. I think I just have an obligation at this point to help other people and to bring my own political ideals as much as I can to Russia, to the city I live in, to my community.
Hey, Jeff,
So this
Jeff,
is
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yeah, I can hear you.
we've got to move to lunch now, but I really appreciate you giving us the time to talk and everything. It was really interesting. Let's give it
Okay. That's okay? Is everything all right?
Yeah, it was good. It was very interesting to hear your story and your activities in Russia and everything. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
It's not creep.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, all right. We'll see you later.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. My daughter is so
No worries.
Okay.
No worries. No worries. See you soon.
Yeah.
So I was like, buddy, my little guy, shut that fucking door. Shut that fucking door.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
it was okay though, really? Honestly?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that was Jeff Monster. So it's time for lunch. We've got pizzas over there. We've got salad, right?
Yes, we're gonna bring the food over here in this area. So
Yeah,
let's
okay,
just 5
so-
minutes, we'll put everything out and then we can all eat.
Yeah. Help yourselves. And during lunch, we're going to play the documentary we made. It's called 8 Years Before, about the Donbass conflict. It explores the reasons why Russia launched the military operation. So feel free to watch. We can talk, and we'll take a bit of an hour to kind of relax and eat and everything. All right?
Hey Don, you can go ahead and cue that up.
Yeah.
So,
One of the gates ready.
yeah, we need to bring